Hi everyone. Tonight, we're going to step into a moment that might send a chill through you before you even pull your own blanket close. Picture yourself moving slowly through the muck of a battlefield camp sometime around the year 1350. The sky is pitch black. The moon is blurred by smoke, and the air bites at your face until sensation begins to fade. You push aside the flap of a soldier's canvas tent, and what greets you is not warmth or relief, but air that feels only slightly less harsh than the wind outside. Cold mud sticks to your boots, and the canvas walls droop with beads of condensation that may as well be ice. You look around and honestly wonder how anyone endured a night like this without freezing to death. And here's the blunt truth: you probably wouldn't. Not with modern habits and central heating shaping your expectations. So before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy the content here. And if you feel like it, leave a comment saying where you are in the world and what time it is right now. I enjoy seeing who's winding down across the globe at the same moment. Now, lower the lights. Let's move deeper into the mud and canvas. The tent around you is basic in every sense. 4 rough poles tied together, the space heavy with the smell of damp wool, smoke, and sweat. There's no fire burning inside. That would be far too risky. One stray spark could turn the whole shelter into an inferno. Instead, any warmth, if it deserves that name, comes from bodies packed shoulder to shoulder, breathing out clouds of steam into the thick air. This is where you'll spend the night. And although you know morning will bring more marching or fighting, the immediate task is simply making it to sunrise. One widely accepted fact stands out. Medieval armies rarely launched major campaigns in the heart of winter, largely because nights like this were so punishing. Chroniclers often noted that operations slowed in late autumn and only picked up again with spring thaws. But as you shiver, you're aware that sieges, the long, grinding pressure placed on castles or towns, couldn't always wait for good weather. Armies sometimes stayed for months in hostile land, regardless of conditions. You imagine frost spreading across the ground, soldiers coughing into their hands, hoping their breath won't turn into a final cloud. Here's an unusual detail. Some records describe soldiers trying to waterproof tents using animal fat or, more strangely, fermented fish oil. Imagine lying under canvas that reeks of rotting herring, but keeps out a bit more rain. The logic was simple: better foul-smelling than soaked. It may sound absurd, but when survival is at stake, even terrible odors become acceptable. Historians still debate how common such tents were. Some argue that royal armies, particularly those of England or France, issued standardized tents designed to be packed onto carts. Others believe that only officers enjoyed such equipment, while ordinary infantry slept under whatever cloaks or scraps they could gather. The reality likely fell somewhere between, shaped by resources, command, and chance. You lie down now, stretching out on the frozen ground, and immediately feel dampness creeping into your body. No matter how you shift, the cold earth seems to pull heat from you relentlessly. The canvas overhead snaps in the wind, a dull rhythm that feels almost mocking. Sleep won't come easily. Nearby, other soldiers mutter in the darkness, sharing curses about the weather and quiet prayers for protection. One is already snoring, his breath rasping like a bellows. Another tugs his cloak tighter, complaining softly about the madness of fighting in such cold. You realize that here, in the dark, even the enemy feels less threatening than the numbness spreading through your fingers. There's a detail you can almost taste in the air: the blended scent of wet wool, old straw, and unwashed bodies. For a brief moment, you think of your modern bed, clean sheets, and steady warmth, and you understand why some chroniclers describe tents like these as living graves. It isn't death by blade or arrow that troubles you most. It's the quiet risk of never waking because your body simply lost its fight against the cold. A rat darts past your hand without hesitation. Vermin thrived in camps like this, feeding on scraps and slipping into bedding for crumbs or warmth. One soldier swats at it half-heartedly, too exhausted to bother. The rat vanishes into the shadows, a reminder that camp life was an endurance ladder, from rodents up to men. Your thoughts drift to the officers' tents nearby, larger, heavier pavilions held up with ropes and poles, sometimes lined with rugs taken from wealthy homes. You feel a flicker of resentment imagining them drinking warm wine while you huddle here. Yet even for them, comfort was limited. Many still woke with frozen beards and stiff limbs, their finer surroundings offering little defense against the night cold. As the hours pass, you hear the canvas creak under forming frost, tiny cracking sounds along the seams. Your back aches, your toes throb, and you understand why so many soldiers sang softly, whispered jokes, or told stories at night. Distraction was often the only blanket available. You hum quietly, the sound unsteady, and sense others listening, grateful for anything that keeps them alert a bit longer before drifting into uneasy sleep. So you close your eyes inside that tent, feeling the coarse canvas sag, hearing frost snap outside, smelling wool, smoke, and humanity. You know morning will come, if you wake at all. Ice will crust your lashes, the march will call again, and the tent offers no promise of safety. It is simply the last barrier between you and the elements. You stir with a stiff groan, but the cold hasn't lifted. Instead, it's settled deeper, like an unwelcome resident in your bones. The canvas above is slick with condensation, dripping lightly onto your cheek. You wipe it away and smear mud into your beard. Outside, it's still night, judging by the silence. The stars are hidden behind fog. You turn onto your side, fumbling for your wool cloak, your single reliable defense against this knowing cold. Wool, scratchy, coarse, often heavy with the smell of lanolin and sweat, yet essential to medieval survival. You feel its weight pressing down. It isn't soft or soothing like a modern blanket, but dense, rough, and stubborn. Soldiers valued it because even when wet, it retained warmth by trapping air close to the skin. That's the practical truth you recognize in the darkness. Cloaks, tunics, and even tent walls made from wool gave medieval armies their best chance of enduring freezing nights. Accounts from the 100 Years' War describe men layering cloak upon cloak, wrapping their legs in strips of cloth, and even using garments beneath them as padding against the frozen ground. Of course, there were peculiar details as well. Some soldiers, driven by the need for warmth, reportedly stuffed their wool garments with horsehair for extra insulation. The result was a strange hybrid, part cloak, part animal, that likely carried the unmistakable scent of the stable. It was hardly fashionable, but when the alternatives were freezing or looking absurd, survival usually won. Picture yourself entering camp wrapped in something resembling an untrimmed pony, drawing stares but also quiet jealousy because you were warmer than most. Historians still debate how effective these makeshift layers truly were compared to furs or hides. Some suggest wool performed better in wet conditions, while others argue fur trapped heat more efficiently. No firm agreement exists, and it is easy to imagine scholars continuing this discussion over coffee or mulled wine, while you lie beneath a cloak that feels both helpful and irritating. The fibers itch constantly against your neck, like a swarm of tiny insects you cannot see. You pull the cloak higher, fold part of it beneath your head, and recognize a simple truth of medieval life. Clothing was rarely used for a single purpose. Cloaks served as blankets, pillows, and sometimes even stretchers for the injured. Tonight, yours fills every role: mattress, cover, and barrier against the cold air slipping through gaps in the tent. As you remain still, you hear the men around you shifting and complaining within their own woolen bundles. One curses his numb toes, another groans about his back, while a third has wrapped himself so tightly he resembles an oversized cocoon, his breath rising and falling steadily inside the folds. The sound is oddly reassuring, like insects settled into their cases for the night. You begin to understand that warmth was as much psychological as physical. Knowing everyone endured the same itch, the same smell, the same rough hold of wool made it easier to bear. You inhale slowly, taking in the mix of scents that defined camp life: damp lanolin, lingering smoke from the fire, and the unmistakable odor of unwashed bodies. It is not pleasant, but it is real, anchoring you to the moment. Modern comforts celebrate artificial fragrances. Here, your version of a diffuser is a soldier who has not bathed in weeks. Another thought drifts through your tired mind: the color of the cloak itself. For ordinary soldiers, wool was rarely dyed, leaving natural shades of gray and brown. Officers, however, might wear brighter colors produced with madder root or woad. These dyes were not purely decorative, they made rank visible even in low light. You imagine scanning the dim interior of the tent and catching a glimpse of red, instantly recognizing a captain or knight while you remain tucked into your modest gray covering. Your thoughts wander to how these cloaks were acquired. Some records suggest armies issued them as standard equipment, while other accounts imply soldiers brought whatever they owned. A poorer man might wear a cloak passed down through family, patched with leather and chewed by moths, yet still serviceable. A wealthier soldier could afford fur lining and fine stitching, earning the quiet envy of his peers. Even in matters of basic survival, social status left its mark. You tighten the wool around yourself and turn onto your side, considering the mental strategies soldiers use to endure the cold. Some may have counted their breaths, focusing on steady rhythm. Others whispered prayers or verses to distract their minds from the unrelenting chill. You, imagining this scene centuries later, think how easily you would trade every cloak for a single radiator. Still, sleep comes in fragments. Each time your body jerks awake from the cold, the damp will brushes your chin as moisture seeps deeper into the fabric. Yet it continues to serve its purpose. You are not comfortable, but you are not frozen. You exist in that narrow space between hardship and survival, and you begin to see why generations trusted wool as their most reliable companion. When the faintest light begins to filter through the seams of the canvas, you pull the cloak over your head to block it out. Frost will greet you soon, followed by another march. For now, you steal a final moment, burrowing into the rough warmth and pretending you can sleep a little longer. The tent feels smaller than before, as if the walls have closed in overnight. In reality, nothing has changed except the closeness of the men around you. That closeness reveals another essential element of survival: shared body heat. Alone, it is limited. Together, it becomes powerful. You find yourself pressed between two other soldiers, shoulders and knees touching, all of you tangled in wool and quiet complaints. This is not comfort, it is necessity. In your modern life, personal space may be a given, but here, huddling can mean the difference between waking stiff or not waking at all. Soldiers understood this instinctively. They crowded together, shared warmth, and endured. Chroniclers describe lines of men sleeping so tightly packed that when one shifted, the entire row moved with him. The lesson was clear: survival often depended more on proximity than equipment. There are, however, odd and almost humorous details preserved in anecdotes. In some cases, soldiers reportedly slept in alternating directions, with heads and feet interlocked like mismatched puzzle pieces. The reason was simple: to reduce complaints about bad breath. You suppress a quiet laugh, imagining boots at face level instead. Not ideal, but preferable to snoring directly in your ear. Historians disagree on how common this practice was. Some believe such descriptions were exaggerated metaphors, while others point to archaeological evidence of communal sleeping areas that suggest it did occur. The debate remains unsettled, but you do not need formal proof. The elbow digging into your ribs is evidence enough that closeness was unavoidable. As the night wears on, you notice how unevenly warmth is distributed. Those in the center, where you lie, are far warmer than the men near the edges, who complain about frozen ears and creeping drafts. This is the harsh balance of cold. Someone always bears more of it. No one volunteers for the outer positions unless ordered. The middle spaces are valuable, often claimed by veterans or favored men. You wonder whether promises of bread or wine ever bought someone a place closer to the center. The air grows heavy with breathing. Dozens of lungs rising and falling together create a steady rhythm that nearly lulls you to sleep. You sway slightly with it, comforted by the shared motion. But the smell remains, reminding you that closeness has its cost. Wool, smoke, unwashed skin, and sour wine blend into a thick haze. You wrinkle your nose, then accept it, knowing there is no alternative. After all, the smell is evidence that the tent is crowded, that you are not alone, and that the shared body heat around you might be enough to last until dawn. There is a brief, telling moment when you shift and your hand grazes the shoulder of the soldier beside you. He does not recoil. Instead, he edges slightly closer, murmuring something that sounds like part prayer, part lullaby. This closeness has nothing to do with friendship or comfort. It exists for one reason only: survival. Inside the tent, modesty and personal space disappear, stripped away until only necessity remains. You imagine returning home and trying to explain that the only barrier between you and freezing to death was the shoulder of a man whose name you barely knew. They would laugh. Here, no one does. Here, no one endures alone. Another soldier mutters in his sleep, suddenly jerks upright, then settles back down, upsetting the careful balance of bodies. A small wave passes through the line as men adjust cloaks and shift positions. You exhale, realizing that even sleep is shared, constantly renegotiated. Rest is fragile here, broken by coughs, snores, or the involuntary shiver of someone fighting the cold. You notice that several men keep hold of their weapons even while asleep, swords or spears pressed to their sides, daggers tucked under cloaks. It may be habit, fear, or simply convenience when space is scarce. Even so, the metal contributes warmth. Cold steel against a leg absorbs body heat, though not without danger. Stories persist of men waking with burn-like frost marks where metal lay too long against their skin. The hours stretch on. You drift into shallow dreams of endless marching, never warming no matter how far you go. Each time you stir, you are reminded of the closeness of others, their heat, their weight, their unavoidable presence. Strangely, this becomes reassuring. The cold feels less aggressive when you are part of a group. You sense it deep in your bones. Humans have always survived by huddling together. In ancient caves, people pressed close around firelight. Here, that instinct continues beneath sagging canvas. A rat scurries overhead, its claws faintly scratching the tent. No one moves. The shared warmth is too valuable to disrupt, so everyone stays still, listening. It is unsettling to realize the animal has more freedom than you do. It can vanish into the night, while you remain pinned by necessity. You close your eyes again, ignoring the itch of wool, the sour smell of sweat, the uneven chorus of snores. Instead, you focus on the warmth, steady, collective, undeniable. You are not comfortable, but you are alive. For a medieval soldier, that was sometimes the greatest victory available. The ground beneath you feels harder as the night wears on, as though the earth itself is determined to drain the last bit of heat from your body. That is when you understand why soldiers valued straw so highly. The cold does not only come from the air. It rises from the ground, creeping through boots, through cloaks, and into the bones. To counter that unseen thief, armies spread layers of straw beneath their bedding, forming a thin barrier between flesh and frozen soil. This was not a luxury, it was a practical necessity of medieval warfare. Siege accounts from France to the Holy Land mention soldiers searching for straw, not just for animals, but to stay alive. A thick layer could make even the worst tent almost bearable, though bearable simply meant less punishing than bare earth. You stretch slightly, your cloak rubbing against your chin, and beneath your back you feel the faint crunch of straw. Brittle stalks press into you like countless tiny needles. It is far from pleasant, but it is essential. The practice also led to odd habits. Some soldiers swore by stuffing straw into their boots overnight, claiming it kept their toes from freezing. You imagine pulling on boots at dawn, only to see dry stalks poking out through the seams like tufts of hair. Men marching off with golden whiskers at their heels, it is hard not to smile despite the discomfort. Practical? Certainly. Attractive? Not at all. Historians still debate whether straw bedding was universal or limited to better supplied armies. Was it standard issue, hauled in wagons, or scavenged from nearby villages, often at the expense of angry farmers? Some believe organized forces, such as those under the French crown, distributed it regularly. Others argue that common soldiers had to scrape together whatever they could find. The records are unclear, and in that uncertainty you picture yourself slipping into the dark to beg, borrow, or steal enough straw to survive the night. You shift again, and the straw crackles, releasing a faint, sweet scent that recalls warm fields in summer. The irony is sharp. You smell the height of the growing season while your fingers ache with cold. Still, the scent brings comfort, a reminder that life continues beyond this frozen misery. For a moment, you pretend you are resting in a barn rather than on a battlefield, that your enemies are distant shapes rather than men sharpening blades nearby. The sound of moving straw fills the tent as others adjust their bedding. It rustles like whispers. One soldier curses as stalks poke through his cloak. Another laughs softly, comparing it to sleeping on porcupines. Yet no one throws it aside. Without straw, the ground would steal their heat without mercy, and frozen soil offers no compromise. Some men grow restless, pulling their cloaks tighter and complaining that the straw has gone damp. There lies the weakness. Straw only works when it is dry. Once soaked by rain or melting snow, it becomes a sponge, draining warmth faster than bare earth. You imagine waking in a soggy heap, your straw mattress turned into an icy bog, and you understand why soldiers guarded dry bedding so fiercely. Good straw became a form of currency, hoarded, traded, even stolen. Your gaze drifts to the seams of the tent, where frost creeps downward like delicate lace. The straw dulls the ground's bite, but the air still stings your nose. You curl tighter, drawing your cloak close as the stalks crunch beneath your hips. Some are sharp, others soft, forming uneven lumps, but you decide a few scratches are preferable to the raw cold of the earth. A soldier nearby mutters that he once saw men in Spain weaving straw into mats, rolling them up like crude sleeping bags. Another scoffs, saying such mats would never last through a damp northern winter. In that brief exchange, the debates of scholars echo through the tired voices of soldiers. What works in one climate fails in another. It is an old argument, ingenuity set against environment. And so, inside the tent, you accept the itchy, prickling mattress beneath you. You let the straw scrape your skin and rattle softly around you, because those brittle stalks are the only things standing between you and the relentless grip of frozen ground. You close your eyes and murmur a quiet thanks to a farmer you will never know, whose leftover harvest has become your lifeline. With that thought, you slip into another restless sleep, supported not by comfort, but by the tough persistence of straw. Before long, you wake again, coughing as a harsh smell creeps beneath the tent flap. Smoke, sharp and stinging, slides into your throat until your eyes burn. For a split second, fear grips you, convinced the tent is on fire. Then memory settles in. The flames are outside, placed there on purpose. A modest fire, guarded by stones or a shallow pit, designed to push warmth inward while keeping most sparks at bay. This was always a careful balance, one medieval armies understood well. Fire meant survival, but it also meant danger. Winter campaign records mention more than one catastrophe where a stray ember turned rows of canvas into roaring flames. This is the established reality. Tents and fire existed in constant tension, each soldier weighing warmth against ruin. You picture it clearly. Flames flicker in the open air. Soldiers huddle near the entrance, faces glowing orange while their backs remain lost in cold shadow. Survival here is a compromise, a smoky wager made night after night. And yet, strange methods emerged. Some accounts describe men burying gently burning logs just beneath the soil inside tents, hoping warmth would rise through the ground. Picture lying down on what feels like a heated floor, pleasantly warm, until you wake coughing, lungs burning, or worse, your cloak beginning to scorch. Hardly an innovation worth praise. But necessity inspires unusual ideas, and a few worked long enough for others to copy them. Historians still argue over how widespread these practices were. Some believe the risks were so obvious that soldiers generally kept fire away from canvas altogether. Others argue that without heat, armies would have been lost to cold long before battle, making risk unavoidable. Most likely, it depended on conditions, available supplies, weather, and how strictly commanders enforced rules. One leader might forbid flames entirely, while another allowed them so long as his men were fit to march at dawn. You inch closer to the tent opening and look at the fire outside. Sparks leap upward into the night, tiny points of light against the darkness. The warmth brushes your face, enough to draw a quiet breath of relief, yet still unable to reach your feet. You notice how those closest to the entrance claim the heat, boots extended, voices louder, laughter sharper. Farther back, men shift uneasily, wrapped tight in cloaks, muttering about the injustice. Even here, warmth creates rank. Your throat itches from the smoke, the bitter taste of half-burned pine lingering on your tongue and in your nose. You realize everyone in camp will wake with red-rimmed eyes, coughing like the sick. Still, no one leaves the fire behind. Smoke is preferable to frozen flesh. A nearby soldier recalls a camp in Burgundy where a commander's pavilion burned, taking maps and banners with it. Another cuts in with a joke about roasted sausages and officers finally feeding their men. Laughter spreads, thin but necessary. Because everyone knows the truth. They are sleeping inside a tinderbox. The fire becomes ritual. Men gather before sleep, warming hands, trading news, singing rough songs. When the flames sink low, they retreat to their tents, carrying the memory of heat like a charm. You imagine the camp now, dozens of small fires scattered across the dark, glowing like embers in an endless field. From above, the army would resemble a constellation pressed into the ground. As you withdraw into the tent, cold returns. The brief warmth gives way to damp breath and stiff canvas. Smoke clings to your cloak like a scent, both reassuring and suffocating. You cough once, then settle back onto the scratchy straw, aware that every man here has made the same silent decision. Better to risk fire than fade quietly from cold. Outside, the crackle softens to a hiss as wood turns to ash. You close your eyes, picturing sparks glowing red, then dull gray, then disappearing. In that fading heat, gratitude mixes with unease. Fire is both protector and threat, ally and executioner. The blaze at the entrance dies down completely, leaving only smoke that lingers in the fabric of your cloak. You cough lightly, roll onto your side, and notice a dim red glow deeper inside the tent. At first, you doubt your vision, but then you see it clearly, dull coals resting in a shallow metal pan. A brazier, small, portable, pulsing faintly in the dark. This is the other defense against the night. Braziers filled with charcoal or embers, carried inside to provide just enough heat to keep death away. Not comfort, just survival. This is well established. Portable braziers were common in noble tents and, when resources allowed, among ordinary soldiers as well. They appear in written records, illustrated manuscripts, and soot-marked fragments uncovered by archaeologists. You move closer, letting the weak warmth reach your knees. It is nothing like a proper hearth, but after hours of shivering, even this feels like mercy. The brazier glows quietly, red at its core, ringed with pale ash. You hold your hands above it, flexing your fingers as stiffness slowly fades. The relief is enough to make you forget how precarious it all is. Here is the curious detail. Soldiers sometimes cooked over these same braziers, filling tents with the smell of stew or dripping fat. Imagine trying to sleep while someone fries bacon on a pan less than a foot from your head. You roll your eyes in the dark, already knowing the result. Half the tent awake, hungry, whispering complaints about selfish appetites. Still, irritation aside, food and fire merged into one. The brazier served as both stove and heater, survival contained in a shallow iron bowl. There is, however, debate among scholars about how often braziers were actually used inside the cramped tents of common soldiers. Some argue the danger was too great, pointing to smoke inhalation and constant fire risk. Others cite accounts describing glowing pans not only in noble quarters, but among regular troops. As usual, the truth is uneven. Some camps forbade it, others allowed it, and many soldiers took the chance when cold made the choice painfully simple. You close your eyes and let your senses drift. Smell comes first, a blend of burnt wood and faint iron, that metallic note of heated metal. It mixes with wool, damp canvas, and the constant odor of unwashed bodies. Yet the brazier adds something else. A reminder of home, perhaps. Kitchens, hearths, bread baked on coals. A fragile comfort, glowing softly against the cold. You think about the men around you and how many of them must have stared into the same dull glow, thinking of wives, children, or simply a roof that didn't flap in the wind. The brazier works well enough, but it has clear limits. The heat is uneven, rising straight upward in a thin column. Your hands slowly warm, turning pink, while your toes stay numb and stiff. You inch your legs closer, only to curse as another soldier pushes you aside, claiming the better position. In tight quarters, even warmth becomes something to fight over. There are no courtesies here. Just shoving, quiet curses, and sometimes open arguments over who gets closest to the glowing metal. An older soldier nearby, more hardened and practical, reminds everyone of the cost. Charcoal and wood are limited, hauled over long distances, seized from villages, and rationed sparingly. A brazier cannot burn without fuel, and fuel never lasts. That warm glow you admire is not guaranteed. It is a privilege. You watch the coals dull slightly and understand how temporary this comfort is, how easily it turns into pale ash. Still, you lean in closer, trying to absorb every bit of heat. The glow reflects in your eyes, flickering like candlelight. You recall how medieval illustrations often show soldiers huddled around a brazier, bent forward like insects drawn to fire. It isn't leisure being shown, but survival. These glowing pans are the heartbeat of a frozen camp, fragile, short-lived, and deeply valued. Someone mutters an odd story as he shifts nearer to the coals. He claims he once saw soldiers in Italy fill a brazier with dried dung instead of wood, insisting it burned longer and produced less smoke. The tent fills with laughter, half disbelief, half ridicule, but you pause to consider it. Dried dung? It might be true. Farmers had used it as fuel for centuries. Soldiers would have done the same if needed. You wrinkle your nose at the idea of the smell, but you also know that survival rarely comes clean or pleasant. You stare into the glowing bowl as sleep begins to weigh on your eyelids. The warmth is soothing, almost mesmerizing. Your head dips, then snaps back up, the familiar rhythm of exhaustion. In this half-dream state, the brazier becomes something else in your mind, a tiny sun trapped in iron, standing guard against the dark. Outside, the winter wind roars. Inside, this fragile star pushes back the cold just enough to keep you alive. A soldier suddenly coughs, waving away the thin trail of smoke curling upward. Another complains of headaches, warning about suffocation. The danger is real. Too many braziers and too little air can turn a tent into a death trap. Each glowing ember is a gamble, a quiet choice between warmth and poison. Still, no one would willingly choose the certainty of freezing over the risk of comfort. As the night drags on, the glow slowly weakens. The heat fades, ash builds up, and the once bright coals sink inward. You stretch your hands toward it one last time, knowing it won't last. Then you pull your cloak tight and retreat into the scratchy mix of wool and straw. The brazier has given you just enough strength to last another hour, another restless dream, another approach toward dawn. As sleep takes hold, you wonder if the embers will survive until morning or die into cold dust before your next breath. You don't know. For now, the fading glow lingers behind your eyelids, staining the darkness red. In that fragile illusion, you allow yourself to believe you might endure the night. You dream of warmth, of hearth fires burning inside stone cottages, of bread baking over crackling logs. When you wake, the dream collapses under reality. The tent is cold. The brazier is dead. Your cloak is damp with frost and breath. Your toes ache as if they've turned to brittle wood. You roll slightly, and something soft brushes your cheek. It isn't wool or straw. It's fur. Thick, oily, and heavy. With a jolt, you realize animal skins line part of the tent wall, with more piled around you as crude insulation. Here is another pillar of survival: hides and furs. Medieval armies relied heavily on animal skins in many forms. Cloaks of sheepskin, deer hide blankets, linings of rabbit or squirrel, and even rough tent walls patched with leather. These materials were warm, durable, and often easier to obtain than woven cloth. Soldiers hunted, traded, or looted for them, and when winter tightened its grip, furs became some of the most valuable possessions in camp. You pull one closer now, a heavy pelt taken from some unlucky animal, and drape it over your shoulders. It still smells of the creature it once was, a raw, earthy scent that clings stubbornly to your senses. It isn't pleasant, but it feels reassuring in a basic, instinctive way. Beneath the fur, warmth slowly returns, creeping back like a cautious visitor. The difference from wool is striking. Wool scratches. Fur calms. You settle into it with a quiet breath, even though the edges are stiff with old grease. And there's a curious detail worth noting. Some soldiers wore cloaks made from wolf skins, complete with the head still attached. The empty snout would bounce as they moved, both intimidating and faintly ridiculous. You imagine rows of men wrapped in wolf hides, the heads swaying as they marched, an army that might look like beasts rising from the forest. Whether such furs were common or reserved for elites remains debated. Some historians argue that ordinary soldiers relied mainly on sheepskin, the cheapest and most available option, while fox or wolf pelts were luxuries for knights and officers. Others point out that looting blurred these lines. When armies raided villages or estates, fine furs could end up on anyone fast enough to claim them. In reality, access may have depended less on rank and more on chance. You shift again, pressing your cheek deeper into the fur. It's rough in places, softer in others, and it gives off a warmth that feels almost alive, something cloth never quite matches. You recall that people in colder regions lined their boots with rabbit fur or wrapped pelts around wrists to keep blood flowing. Simple measures, but often the difference between injury and survival. The tent feels quieter now. Furs soften sound as well as cold. The wind outside seems distant, less threatening, as if the hides themselves stand guard. You listen to the slow breathing of the men around you, some wrapped only in cloaks, others lucky enough to share the animal skins. The air smells thick and musky, oily, mixed with a faint trace of smoke. It's heavier than wool, but grounding. A soldier nearby chuckles softly, telling a story about a comrade who once tried to tan his own hide in camp using salt, ash, and pure effort. The result was a stiff, rotten mess that cracked like old paper and smelled so bad no one would sleep near him. You smile quietly in the dark, grateful that the furs around you, while far from clean, at least do their job. As you drift again towards sleep, another long-running question crosses your mind, one that historians still argue over while you lie there, half awake. Were animal hides used mainly to line tents, or were they worn as clothing? Archaeological finds reveal scraps of leather mixed into camp waste, yet their original purpose remains uncertain. They may have come from garments, horse gear, or improvised insulation. Some historians believe hides were vital to reinforcing tent walls during northern campaigns, while others argue soldiers primarily wore them on their bodies. With no firm evidence, both possibilities remain open. You can picture tents stitched together like rough quilts, while men huddle beneath cloaks still bearing traces of hooves and tails. You slide your hand across the fur once more, following the lay of the hair. The motion is unexpectedly calming, similar to touching a living creature. A quiet sense of thanks rises for the animal, even though its identity is lost to time. It is long gone, yet tonight it protects your life. This is survival in its rawest exchange, people drawing warmth from animals they killed, hoping it buys them another night. Outside, the fire has fully burned out, leaving only a memory of light. Inside the shelter, the hides continue their silent task. Your body slowly relaxes. For the first time in days, the shaking eases. You shut your eyes and imagine the warmth of a bear's den, a wolf's lair, a rabbit's burrow. For a brief moment, you are no longer a soldier in a campaign, but a creature among other creatures, seeking shelter from cold. Your breath clouds the air, settling on the fur as tiny beads of moisture gather at the hair tips. You are struck by how the hide still defends you even after death, repelling dampness while holding heat. It is not refined. It is not clean. But it works. In this world, usefulness is the only form of beauty. The night drags on, yet it feels less oppressive. Wrapped in wool, straw beneath you, fur across your chest, you are as close to comfort as a medieval soldier can expect. You murmur thanks, to the unknown animal, to the farmer who raised it, to the hunter who killed it, to chance itself for placing it here. Then you allow yourself to sink into the fragile warmth, trusting the fur to keep death at bay a little longer. Your body jolts awake with a sharp pain that feels strangely distant, almost unreal. You stretch and realize, with frustration, that your boots are still on. Of course they are. You never removed them last night. You could not afford to. In this cold, Taking off boots is a gamble with your toes, and losing that gamble has permanent consequences. This is the blunt reality. Medieval soldiers often slept with boots on to avoid frostbite. Before insulated footwear existed, when leather froze stiff overnight, removing boots was not just uncomfortable, it was risky. Some soldiers wrapped their feet with strips of cloth beneath their boots. Even those, when damp, froze solid. So the boots stayed on, muddy, foul-smelling, painful, becoming part of the bedding as much as the cloak. You shift and wince. The pressure of hardened leather against swollen feet is intense. Yet removing them would be worse. Nearby, one man groans, muttering that he cannot feel his toes. Another rubs his boots in the straw, as if checking that his feet still exist. In the darkness, images of frostbite surface, blackened skin, toes breaking away, and you understand why no one dares expose their feet. Then comes a small but curious detail. Soldiers sometimes packed grass or moss inside their boots at night. Not for softness, but for warmth. You can almost sense it, the dry crunch beneath your toes, the earthy scent rising upward. Some claimed it trapped heat better than socks. Others mocked it, saying it became wet sludge by morning. Still, in your position, you would likely try it too. Every toe matters. Historians continue to argue over whether sleeping in boots was truly universal. Some records suggest men removed footwear to dry it near fires, risking frozen feet to avoid rigid leather at dawn. Others indicate officers with larger tents and better heating could afford bare feet at night. The question remains unresolved, echoing across centuries. Comfort versus survival. Ease versus safety. You move your toes inside the stiff boots. The sensation is weak, barely noticeable. A flicker of panic follows. You stomp hard against the straw until blood surges back with sharp, stabbing pain. You grit your teeth and mutter curses. The man beside you does the same. The tent fills with the muted rhythm of men forcing circulation back into frozen feet. It sounds almost ridiculous, like a group of irritated drummers. In reality, it is simply the nightly routine of staying alive. The smell of boots is impossible to escape. Leather soaked with sweat and mud, never properly cleaned, carrying a sour hint of decay. You wrinkle your nose, but no one else reacts. After weeks in camp, the odor fades into the background, blending with wool, smoke, and human bodies. You think of the shoes you once wore at home, clean, dry, changed often, and realize that here, boots are a second skin. You also notice how leather stiffens in the cold. Some men wake to frozen laces and boots so rigid they barely bend. They curse and strike them against rocks or each other's backs to soften them. Others sleep with their feet pressed against another body, using shared warmth to keep the leather flexible. You wonder how many boots split during the night, seams bursting, forcing soldiers to march barefoot through snow. The thought chills you more than the wind outside. Your hand moves to the straps on your boots, feeling the rough stitching and hardened seams. You picture the march ahead, mud gripping the soles, snow filling every gap, frost biting with each step. No wonder soldiers guarded their boots so fiercely. Even in sleep, they were more than footwear. They were lifelines. Lose them and survival itself slips away. Someone nearby mutters a story about a campaign in Flanders, where men boiled their leather boots to soften them enough to eat. The tent breaks into tired laughter, though it is hard to tell if the tale is meant as humor. Hunger and cold distort judgment, and you find yourself staring at your boots, wondering how edible they might become if desperation deepened. The question returns, were boots more valuable than cloaks, more precious than weapons? Some chroniclers suggested so, noting entire units rendered helpless when footwear failed. You realize that while weapons decide battles, boots decide whether soldiers reach them at all. Without boots, you cannot march, fight, or survive. That is why you keep them on. Even as your feet ache and swell, you pull your cloak tighter, curl onto your side, and draw your knees inward. The boots creak against the straw, rigid and unforgiving. You try to ignore the pressure at your ankles, the throbbing in your toes, the stench around you. Instead, you focus on the simple fact that your feet are still there. Still attached. Still warm enough to carry you tomorrow. It is a minor victory, but in a frozen camp, small victories are all that exist. As you close your eyes again, the low sound of men shifting, groaning, and stamping fills the tent. You picture the sound spreading through the camp, hundreds of boots thudding softly into straw, as if the army itself is drumming against the cold. It is a rhythm of survival, not played by instruments, but by men forcing their blood to keep moving. In that dull, shared noise, there is an odd sense of reassurance. You are not alone. Every soldier here suffers the same ache, the same frozen toes, the same sour stench. Together, you stomp, groan, swear, and endure. Somehow, in the darkness, that shared hardship is enough. You draw yourself tighter, boots pulled close to your chest. Sleep comes lightly and never fully settles. Then a sudden scrape of metal snaps you awake. For an instant, you fear the enemy has broken into the camp. But no, it is only the man beside you shifting in his armor. You peer at him through the faint glow of dying embers and realize he has chosen to sleep fully equipped. Breastplate, pauldrons, gauntlets, all rattling as he searches for a position that does not force steel directly into bone. Here is the widely accepted reality. Soldiers argued constantly over whether to sleep in armor. Records from the 100 Years' War, and even earlier periods, show both choices. Some men kept at least part of their armor on, convinced that a surprise attack would be fatal if they were unprepared. Others removed it, worried that heavy steel restricted circulation and would leave them stiff, slow, or half-numb by morning. Each night was a calculated risk, security balanced against physical survival. You hear him grunt again, the plates complaining with every movement. He is clearly uncomfortable, yet he persists. He mutters about a raid the previous winter, when men were caught without armor and killed in their sleep. The fear in his voice lingers, and you understand it. Better to wake sore and bruised than not wake at all. Then there is a lesser-known compromise. Some soldiers slept wearing only their mail shirts. They claimed the linked rings offered warmth as well as protection. Picture it settling into a bedroll, clinking like coins in a sack. One man across the tent laughs quietly, recalling how he once woke tangled in his mail, unable to turn over without help. The tent fills with muted laughter, softened by wool and fur, because even in suffering, humor finds a way in. Still, historians continue to debate how common this practice really was. Did ordinary infantry bother with armor at night? Some argue that only knights and officers, those with status and resources, slept armored. Others suggest that even common archers sometimes kept steel close, if not worn outright. Archaeology offers no clear answer about what was worn while sleeping. So the argument carries on in warm lecture halls, while you lie here listening to metal scrape against straw. The armored man shifts again, muttering under his breath. You can almost feel the pressure bearing down on him. Armor was never light. Depending on the era, it could weigh 30, 40, even 50 pounds. Wearing it through battle was exhausting enough. Sleeping in it bordered on self-punishment. And yet he holds to the habit, fear speaking louder than comfort. You touch your own side, where a dagger rests beneath your cloak. That is your solution. No armor, no mail, just cold steel within reach. Many soldiers chose the same, trusting speed and awareness more than heavy protection. Still, doubt creeps in. What if raiders come tonight? What if the first strike lands before you can rise? In that moment, his choice to endure clanking misery almost seems sensible. The scent of oiled steel mixes with the smell of wool and hides. Sharp, metallic, familiar. You close your eyes and imagine rows of men, some armored, some not, all huddled inside fragile tents. The difference between them is not only tactical, but social. Officers, with greater means, could afford to sleep armored and had tents large enough to manage the bulk. Poorer soldiers had neither the equipment nor the space. Inequality does not vanish, even in the cold. Someone murmurs that he once saw a man crushed by his own breastplate during the night, suffocated because he could not roll properly. Another scoffs, calling it an exaggeration. Still, the image chills you, being smothered by the very thing meant to protect you. That irony is too harsh to laugh at. The hours drag on. The man beside you groans again, armor shrieking softly as he turns. You imagine the bruises he will carry in the morning, red marks etched where steel pressed too long against skin. Yet he seems satisfied with his decision, whispering prayers to saints who guard those on watch. Fear is a heavy covering, but sometimes it insulates better than wool. You think of your own life, where sleep means comfort and danger does not wait beyond canvas walls. Here, every choice carries risk. Armor or none, boots or bare feet, straw or frozen earth. Nothing is simple, nothing is safe. The wind rattles the tent poles, and you flinch. Your hand closes around the dagger without thinking. For a moment, you consider reaching for the breastplate near your feet and strapping it on. You decide against it. Tonight, exhaustion outweighs fear. You leave the dagger close, trusting that if death comes, you will meet it with steel in hand, not steel pressing on your chest. The man beside you shifts once more, his armor protesting. You sigh and let your eyes close, accepting the noise. Perhaps he will wake safer. Perhaps not. In the quiet, a realization settles in. Soldiers in these camps lived constantly on the edge of choice, pulled between comfort and fear, every decision a gamble with death. Even in sleep, war demanded payment. You shift again, pushing yourself upright briefly to catch your breath. The air inside the tent hits you like a damp blow, thick with smoke, sweat, and wet wool. It sticks in your throat. You lift the flap for a moment, and another sensation washes over you, warm, animal breath steaming into the night. Outside, tethered close, stands a line of horses. Frost glints faintly on their sides, their nostrils releasing clouds into the dark. Here, you recall another established fact. Medieval soldiers often depended on animals for warmth. Horses, mules, even oxen tied near tents gave off heat that seeped through the canvas, raising the temperature inside by a few precious degrees. It was not much, but when a single degree could mean survival, it mattered. Entire cavalry units pitched their tents near picket lines for warmth as much as for security. You step closer and place a gloved hand against a horse's flank. The animal shifts, ear flicking, but stays calm. Heat flows instantly into your palm, stronger than expected. You imagine lying against that body, your back warmed by a living furnace of muscle and hair. And in truth, some soldiers did exactly that, curling into straw beside their horses and using them as enormous, breathing blankets. Unusual, perhaps, but effective. And there is one more curious detail. Chronicles from winter campaigns describe soldiers deliberately bringing sheep or goats into their tents, not for food, but for warmth. The animals bleated and kicked, fouling the straw, but their heat made the difference between enduring the night and freezing where they lay. Yet even then, they were welcomed like living furnaces. You find yourself smiling softly at the image of a knight trying to keep his composure while a goat clambers across his bedding. In the cold, dignity matters little. Still, historians continue to argue about how common this practice truly was. Some believe only mounted troops gained much benefit, since horses needed constant care and were already kept nearby. Others maintain that infantrymen and camp followers also drew smaller animals into their shelters, particularly when snow piled high. Written records are limited, so the discussion remains unresolved. You can almost imagine scholars, warm in their libraries, debating whether goats truly shared tents with knights, while you stand here inhaling the undeniable evidence of animal warmth. The scent of horses fills your nose, musky and earthy, blended with hay and manure. To modern sensibilities it might seem unpleasant, but on this frozen night it feels oddly comforting. It is the smell of life, of warmth, of survival. You lean in closer, your forehead brushing a coarse mane, and for a brief moment the cold loosens its grip. You shut your eyes, nearly grateful enough to murmur thanks. Back inside the tent, the men talk quietly about their tethered animals. One boasts that he will sleep pressed against his mare if the night worsens. Another laughs, claiming his mule kicks too fiercely to risk it. A third recounts a tale of men in Poland who supposedly shared warmth with their cows in deep snow. The tent quivers with muffled laughter, the kind born from fatigue and necessity. You realize that both mockery and fellowship serve to keep fear at bay. The straw beneath you still pokes, and the cloak still irritates your skin, but knowing the animals are close eases your unease. They are more than transport or labor. They are lifelines. You recall how knights often swore oaths to their horses, treating them almost as fellow soldiers. In moments like this, it feels logical. By day, horses carried men into battle. By night, they helped keep them alive. The air grows slightly warmer as the combined heat of men and beasts mingles. Moisture gathers on the canvas walls, dripping onto your shoulders like rain. The cold has not disappeared, but it is softened. The tent no longer feels like a grave, but a refuge. You begin to understand that this warmth is shared, not purely human. People and animals enduring together. You lie back, listening to muted hoofsteps in straw, the occasional snort, the steady grind of teeth as animals chew their feed. The sounds are strangely calming, like a camp lullaby. Your fellow soldiers seem soothed as well. Some hum along with the rhythm. Others whisper stories of their mounts, how a horse once saved them, how a mule carried them through a river, how an ox hauled a wagon farther than any man could manage. The question surfaces again in your mind. Did medieval armies truly rely this much on animals for warmth, or is this later romantic exaggeration? Some historians argue the evidence is weak, noting that tents, braziers, and heavy cloaks already explain survival. Others counter that the sheer practicality of using animals makes it almost inevitable. As you lie there, feeling faint heat seep through the canvas, you sense the truth of it in your bones. You close your eyes and imagine yourself as part of the herd. Your cloak becomes your hide. Your breath clouds the air. Your body presses against others for warmth. You are no different from the horse tied outside, each of you waiting for dawn. The thought humbles and steadies you. The cold remains, but it becomes manageable. You pull your cloak tighter, straw beneath you, fur across your chest, boots squeezing your toes, dagger resting at your side. Around you men snore, mutter, and shift. Outside, horses stamp and exhale clouds into the night. Together, humans and animals endure the darkness, clinging to life with little more than breath, hide, and stubborn resolve. In that moment, you understand that survival is not noble, graceful, or even comfortable. It is cramped, dirty, awkward, and often absurd. But it works. You are still alive. You are still breathing. And in a freezing medieval tent, that is victory enough. You wake again to the sound of a man gulping noisily beside you, liquid sloshing in a wooden cup before he sighs in satisfaction. In the low light, you catch the sharp, sour-sweet scent of wine. He offers the cup with a grin that shows more gaps than teeth. You hesitate, then take a swallow. Warmth spreads quickly, false and brief, but for a moment it feels like fire in your veins. Here is the straightforward fact. Alcohol was a regular presence in medieval camps, especially wine in southern regions and ale or mead farther north. It was not only for morale. Soldiers believed drinking before sleep helped push back the cold, dulling pain and easing rest. Commanders even issued rations not just for enjoyment, but because a slightly drunk soldier was still alive, while a fully sober one might freeze. The wine burns going down, sharp and sour from the cheap wooden cask it came from. It is no fine vintage, just the rough supply handed out by quartermasters, watered down and often spoiled. After days of shivering, you scarcely care. It warms your stomach, weighs down your eyelids, and pushes your aches a little farther away. Then comes the curious detail. Some soldiers believed spiced wine or mulled ale held special powers, driving out cold with cloves, cinnamon, or pepper, if they were fortunate enough to have such luxuries. Picture a frozen camp where men huddle in cloaks while, on one rare night, someone sips hot wine scented with cinnamon like a favored lord. You can almost smell it, rich and unfamiliar, drifting through the smoke and making others groan with envy. Historians still debate how effective alcohol truly was at keeping men warm. Some point out that while it creates a feeling of heat, it actually widens blood vessels and speeds heat loss. Others argue that in a world without modern medicine, that illusion was enough. It allowed men to sleep instead of lying awake all night in misery. The question remains unsettled, leaving you to balance science against desperation as you take another sip. The tent grows livelier as more cups are passed. Laughter rises, voices breaking into songs, off-key and crude, bouncing off the canvas walls. One man slaps his leg, Another hacks through a cough but keeps singing. The wine loosens speech, softens pain, and briefly warms the spirit, if not the flesh. You feel the mood lift from bleak to defiant, as if the men have convinced themselves they are in a tavern instead of a muddy camp. The scent of fermented grapes blends with wool, smoke, and sweat, sharp, earthy, and oddly reassuring. You lean back against the straw, cup in hand, and let the haze settle in. The cold still bites at your feet, but it fades into the background. The wine speaks louder than the frost. One soldier begins telling a story of a captain who swore by burnt wine, heated until steaming and mixed with honey, claiming it kept his men from freezing during a siege. Another voice cuts in with a crude joke about warming the blood by other means, and once again the tent fills with laughter. You shake your head, but you cannot help smiling. Humor and wine go hand in hand. Both help men endure when reality becomes too harsh. You look around the tent and notice faces flushed red by the brazier's weakening glow, eyes half closed, lips darkened with drink. Some men have already collapsed onto their straw bedding, snoring heavily. Others grip their cups as if they are charms, drinking slowly, stretching out the final sip before giving in to sleep. You realize this shared habit is not only about warmth, but about comfort. Drinking together reminds everyone that they are still human, still alive, still able to feel small moments of pleasure. As the cups empty, the tent grows quieter. Snoring begins to rise, deep and uneven. A few men mumble in their sleep, some with soft laughter still escaping their lips. You feel yourself drifting as well, soothed by the lingering heat in your stomach. For a brief moment, the frozen world beyond the canvas fades from your mind. But doubt soon returns. You know the warmth is deceptive. Wine cannot prevent frostbite, and in many cases, it makes it worse. You think about how many soldiers likely never woke after drinking through the night, slipping into sleep while the cold slowly claimed them. Historians believe this happened more often than records admit, quiet deaths mistaken for rest. The thought unsettles you, and you glance down at the hand holding your cup. Still you drink. What alternative is there? Without fire, without thick furs, without hope, you drink. You shut your eyes, let the false warmth take hold, and allow sleep to come. You dream of hearth fires, crowded taverns, and laughter without fear. For a few hours, you are no longer a soldier in a frozen camp. You are simply a man holding a cup, protected by the illusion of heat. When morning arrives and the frost returns, you will rise with the rest, stamping frozen boots, cursing stiff fingers, and moving on. Survival here depends on illusions, and sometimes illusions are enough. The warmth of the wine fades completely, and the tent sinks into a deeper stillness. Men shift beneath their cloaks, some muttering, others already lost in drunken sleep. You close your eyes, hoping to rest, but instead you notice a low, steady sound from the far end of the tent. It is quiet and rhythmic, closer to chanting than singing. Soon another voice joins, then another, until the murmurs blend into something familiar. Not a tavern song or a crude ballad, but a prayer. This is the key historical detail. Many medieval soldiers prayed before sleeping. In a world dominated by cold, hunger, and sudden violence, faith was as practical as straw bedding or wool cloaks. Chronicles frequently mention evening prayers in camp, sometimes whispered alone, sometimes led by a chaplain. Soldiers prayed for warmth, protection, forgiveness, and above all, the strength to wake up alive. You listen as Latin phrases pass through the tent, poorly understood by most, but faithfully repeated. Pater Noster, Ave Maria. The words flow steadily, calming in a way that smoke and fire cannot. Even men too drunk to stand take part, their speech slurred but sincere. The sound settles over you like an extra layer of cloth. It does not provide heat, but it does offer comfort. Then comes a lesser-known detail. Some soldiers carried small relics or charms, believing they could protect them from cold as well as from blades. A sliver of bone said to belong to a saint, a scrap of holy cloth, even a stone taken from a church floor. These objects were hidden in boots or stitched into cloaks. You imagine a hardened mercenary gripping a bone fragment while whispering prayers through cracked lips, convinced it will keep the frost from stealing his breath. Historians still debate how genuine this faith truly was. Did soldiers honestly believe divine forces kept them warm, or was it simply a ritual meant to calm the mind? Some scholars argue the prayers served as psychological tools, helping men settle fear before sleep. Others believe devotion ran deeper, that soldiers trusted saints and angels as much as straw and fire. The reality is unclear. Yet as you lie there, you feel the steady rhythm of prayer slow your breathing, making the tent feel less like a grave and more like a chapel. A man beside you whispers a personal plea, not in Latin, but in the rough language of his home village. He asks for his wife and children to be protected, and for his body to endure another night. The strain in his voice makes it clear that faith is more than habit. It is longing. Nearby, another soldier holds a wooden cross, his thumb tracing its edges until the grooves shine smooth. In the weak light of the dying brazier, the wood looks worn by many campaigns, perhaps passed down through generations. The mood inside the tent changes. The earlier rowdiness fades, replaced by something calm and steady. Even those who do not pray lie quietly, listening. The wind outside feels farther away, less threatening. For a moment, you almost believe the tent itself has been strengthened by the whispered words inside it. You let your thoughts wander, considering how fear and faith often travel together. You do not know if prayer truly keeps the cold away, but you do know your body relaxes, your teeth stop chattering, and you feel less alone. Perhaps that is miracle enough. Someone tells a story from another part of the tent about a siege where soldiers claimed a saint appeared at night, walking among them and wrapping them in warmth so they did not freeze. The storyteller swears his grandfather witnessed it. A few men laugh quietly, but no one openly dismisses the tale. When the cold is this severe, even unlikely hope feels welcome. You almost imagine the scent of incense, though none burns here. You think of wealthier camps, especially during crusades, where chaplains might have burned herbs or resin during prayers, filling tents with sweet smoke instead of the sour air you breathe now. You envy that image. Still, you remind yourself that these half-drunken, softly spoken prayers, is its own kind of incense. Not for the nose, but for the spirit. Time stretches on. The prayers fade, and silence slowly returns. Yet the comfort remains. The tent no longer feels like a trap, but like a fragile shelter. You pull your cloak tighter, straw beneath you, boots still on, fur across your chest, dagger within reach. Around you, men fall asleep with words still forming on their lips. You breathe out and let your eyes close. Faith, relics, prayers, whether superstition or salvation, they ease you enough to rest. The frost may return, the wind may howl, but tonight you believe you are watched over. The night continues, and though the prayers have ended, the camp never truly falls silent. A cough here, a groan there, the constant shifting of men trying to find a position they can endure. You roll over and immediately notice a sting, both on your skin and in your pride. Laughter drifts from a nearby pavilion. It's lighter, freer than the coarse chuckles of men packed like sardines in your tent. These are officers, relaxed, their tent glowing faintly from within. This was a common reality in medieval camps. Comfort reflected rank. Commanders and knights slept under larger tents, round or rectangular, supported by strong poles, while ordinary soldiers squeezed into low canvas shelters barely big enough to crouch. In the Bayeux tapestry, Norman tents appear tall and colorful, a visual reminder that the wealthy brought comforts even to war. Your gaze drifts toward that glowing tent. Inside, officers lounge on rugs or pallets, often elevated on wooden platforms above the frozen ground. Some sip the last of their spiced wine, others recline on fur-lined cushions. Meanwhile, you pull your cloak tighter, pressing your face into damp straw as the cold seeps into your cheeks. Oddly enough, chronicles note that some high-ranking leaders even brought feather beds. Imagine common soldiers stamping their feet to keep blood flowing, while a duke or baron stretched luxuriously on goose down. Entire household furnishings were sometimes shipped to the field. Some pavilions resembled small houses more than tents. Resentment among the rank and file is almost audible. Men muttered about lords' velvet curtains while their own canvas leaked rain onto their faces. Modern researchers debate how extreme this disparity was. Some argue tales of featherbeds were exaggerations meant to mock noble decadence. Others believe the wealthiest genuinely indulged, as war was about display as much as survival. Archaeological evidence, ornate tent poles and decorated fabrics, supports the latter view. Ultimately, the reality likely varied. Some lords indulged, others endured. The officer's tent glows, its warmth a constant reminder of inequality. You wonder if they ever feel guilt, or if comfort numbs them. In your tent, someone spits into the straw and mutters a curse. Another whispers a bitter joke. When the frost kills us, the captains will use our cloaks as napkins. Laughter follows, sharp and spiteful. The scent from that rich tent is different too. Instead of smoke and sour wool, hints of burning resin or aromatic would reach you, a luxury meant to mask odors and soothe nerves. You imagine lying there, eyes closed, sweet smoke curling around you, convincing you that the battlefield is far away. Yet, in a strange way, resentment fuels survival. The grumbling in your tent binds you to your fellows. Misery and anger are shared. The gap between classes is obvious, but it gives you something to rail against. If they need velvet curtains, they are weaker than us. One soldier recounts a tale of a noble's pavilion collapsing in a storm, burying a feather bed in mud. The tent erupts in laughter, warm and fierce. The wind rattles both tents, the grand one and yours, and you take grim satisfaction in knowing that canvas is canvas, whether silk or hemp. Perhaps this is the only true equality. The sky does not care about rank, the frost spares none. Still, as laughter dies and the officer's pavilion glows steadily, envy creeps back. You curl tighter into your straw, muttering, "The cold will not break you tonight." Survival is its own victory, and you cling to it as frost whispers otherwise. Sleep drifts in shallow waves until a new sound stirs you, tearing fabric and the shuffle of feet. At first, you fear raiders, but then you hear the thump of wood against earth, grunts of men hauling heavy loads. You lift the tent flap and see shadows moving from a distant village. Canvas, rope, and straw are being dragged toward the army shelters. It strikes you. These tents aren't always neat supplies from a royal storehouse. Often they were taken. Soldiers routinely dismantled barns, stripped cottages, and plundered weaving shops. War consumed roofs and rafters as much as lives. Chronicles tell of villages left bare overnight, their walls gutted for timber, thatch stolen for bedding. The battlefield didn't just bleed men, it bled landscapes. A small group passes, arms full of a tapestry torn from a church wall. They laugh, boasting it will make fine insulation for their captain's tent. You lie back, seething at the unfairness, but aware of the grim practicality. Survival always came at someone else's expense. A strange image lingers. Soldiers sleeping beneath canvas die with painted saints, once meant to glorify God inside a chapel, now sagging in mud, eyes staring at the night sky. It's a grotesque irony, but frost leaves no room for scruples. Historians remain divided on how systematic looting was. Some argue official quartermasters supplied tents, and chroniclers exaggerated theft. Others point to torn textiles, reused beams, and charred church fittings found near camp remains as evidence that plundering was widespread. One fact is clear: armies rarely carried everything they needed. They took what they could, and survival came first. Inside your tent, murmurs rise as men gossip about the day's plunder. One claims an officer slept on velvet curtains stripped from a manor. Another complains that common soldiers lie on damp straw while lords enjoy brocade. Resentment simmers, a slow fire in the freezing night. The scent drifts in: fresh hay, smoke, and something sharper, paint and wax scraped from looted icons. You wrinkle your nose, imagining the ruined homes behind it. Somewhere, a villager wakes in a roofless house, shivering, cursing the soldiers now lying warmer because of his loss. One nearby soldier shrugs, "Better them than us. They'll hate us either way." Another, younger and less seasoned, shakes his head but stays silent. You sense his unease, the quiet acknowledgement that every comfort here is taken from someone else. Yet no one returns what they've taken. No one ventures out into the cold to replace a single strand of thatch. You curl deeper into your cloak, the prickly straw beneath you suddenly heavier with guilt. The reality presses on you. Your warmth tonight might be purchased at the expense of a farmer's misery. Still, your body refuses to relinquish it. Cold erases morality. When frost grips your bones, you cling to whatever keeps you alive, regardless of its origin. As night deepens, the wind rattles the tent canvas. You close your eyes and imagine the village now empty, its walls hollow, roof stripped bare. The camp benefits from it, glowing faintly with stolen warmth. Survival, it seems, always comes at the cost of someone else's life, comfort, or heat. And you, wrapped in wool and fur, lying on straw that belonged to another, are as much a thief as a soldier. You wake suddenly, unsure why. Then you feel it, your breath stiff on your upper lip, frozen into a brittle crust. Your fingers meet tiny shards of ice clinging to your mustache and beard. The sensation is odd, as if your own body has betrayed you, freezing itself from the inside out. Medieval chronicles frequently note that soldiers woke to find their breath crystallized in facial hair or even in their cloaks during bitter northern European winters. Men would scrape frost from their faces and clothing before standing, proof of how viciously cold nights could become, when even breathing turned into a hazard. Looking around, you see others suffering the same fate. A man rubs his beard roughly, sending tiny white flakes onto the straw. Another swears, spitting as his saliva freezes midair. The scene is cruelly comical, rows of warriors resembling men who have dipped their faces in sugar. Some soldiers smeared animal fat or resin into their beards to keep frost from sticking, faces slick and shiny in the brazier's glow, grinning as if proud of the trick. The smell would have been awful, but when the alternative is frozen facial hair, the choice is simple. Historians debate how common these tricks really were. Some suggest the stories are exaggerated, dramatized by chroniclers. Others argue they are plausible, given condensation and sub-zero nights in canvas tents. Archaeology cannot confirm frost-covered beards, so the question remains open. Yet anyone who has faced bitter cold knows the truth doesn't need parchment to prove itself. Inside the tent, the air feels sharp, cutting with every breath. You cover your mouth with your cloak, inhaling through wool, hoping the fabric will warm the air before it reaches your lungs. Around you, coughs rise in a rough, ragged chorus. Cold damages not only skin but also throats and lungs. Every soldier risks illness as much as frostbite. The sound of hacking men is constant, as persistent as the wind rattling the canvas. You scrape your own mustache, watching frost fall onto your lap, glitter briefly, then melt into damp patches soaking your cloak. Wet wool chills faster than dry, almost worse than the frost itself. You pull the cloak tighter, muttering. Survival is not one battle but a dozen small skirmishes, against frost, damp, and your own body's betrayal. A man jokes hoarsely, "At least we save on sugar, we carry it on our lips." The tent chuckles weakly. Humor here is another blanket, thin but valuable. You join in, even as your fingers ache from rubbing your frozen beard. The tent smells heavier tonight, smoke from the brazier, sweat trapped in damp wool, and faint animal musk rubbed into beards. Pungent and oppressive, yet oddly reassuring. Each scent confirms you and your comrades are still alive, still breathing frost into the air. The canvas itself crackles with frost, edges stiff as parchment. You tap it, a thin sheet flakes onto your hand. The tent has become a frozen cocoon. Every breath deposits a new layer of ice, yet beneath the icy crust, you endure. You lie back, fatigue pressing into your chest. Frost melts slowly from your mustache, tasting faintly of iron and smoke. You close your eyes, shivering, letting the absurdity sink in. Mighty soldiers reduced to scraping frost from their faces, yet survival often looks ridiculous. It is not glory, banners, or honor. It is frost in your beard, damp in your cloak, straw scratching your back, boots bruising your feet. It is waking stiff and sore, yet waking nonetheless. You drift back into half-sleep, ice crackling in your beard, a reminder that you are still alive, still breathing, still stubborn enough to endure. Frost may claim your mustache, but not your will. By now, your body has learned every shade of cold, the sting in fingertips, the dull ache in bones, The uncontrollable shivers. You roll over and hear a faint clink. Someone nearby shifts a bundle of stones wrapped in cloth. One slips free, touching your hand. Surprisingly, it is warm, not blazing, but radiating steady heat. Soldiers in medieval camps often heated stones before nightfall and carried them into tents, wrapped in cloth or leather. These stones, baked until faintly red, released warmth for hours, a simple but effective shield against frost. Chronicles from Northern Europe and Crusader camps note this practice. You draw the stone close, cradling it in your hands. Its warmth seeps into your palms, a small miracle. You tuck it beneath your cloak against your chest. Something so ordinary, a lump of rock, feels more precious than gold. Some soldiers tucked hot stones into boots or under tunics, pressing them against bellies. Grim warriors carrying glowing bundles like swaddled infants. A few burned themselves badly, yet the risk was preferable to freezing. Even pain is better than numbness. Scholars remain uncertain about how common this practice really was. Some argue that heating stones was primarily a peasant technique, passed down from rural households that used hearthstones to warm their beds. Others suggest that soldiers across Europe quickly adopted it because of its simplicity. Archaeological discoveries of scorched rocks at old campsites indicate it happened frequently, though the evidence doesn't clarify whether they were used for cooking, forges, or warmth. The uncertainty lingers, like smoke in the air. You press the stone closer, letting its weight anchor you against the cold night. Its heat is reassuring, a reminder that survival often depends on the simplest actions. Around you, other soldiers shift their bundles, muttering in satisfaction when they find one still warm. The rustle of cloth and faint clatter of stones fills the tent, forming a strange but comforting rhythm. An army of men, each with a hot stone, pretending, if only for a moment, that they have a hearth of their own. The scent of scorched earth clings to your hands. It blends with smoke, wool, and damp straw, creating the camp's distinct aroma. You inhale deeply. Though not pleasant, it is grounding. This smell speaks of resourcefulness, proof that men can borrow warmth from the earth itself. A soldier near you whispers how his grandmother would place hot stones at the foot of her bed on icy nights. Another adds that women in his village heated bricks and wrapped them in cloth for children. Stories like these ripple through the tent, connecting memory and survival. You realize that war often borrows from home, taking every scrap of domestic knowledge and repurposing it for the battlefield. Inevitably, the warmth fades. You feel the stone cooling, heat draining into the night. You clutch it as if willing it to last. Its brief, bright warmth mirrors life itself, fierce for a while, then slowly dimming, yet treasured to the end. You think of countless soldiers clutching stones, whispering prayers or curses as they cooled in their arms. The debate flickers in your mind. Were these measures truly protective, or merely symbolic gestures against relentless cold? Some historians dismiss them as minor comforts. Others argue they could be life-saving in severe winters. You don't need a lecture. Right now, the fading warmth feels like the difference between sleep and endless shivering. Your eyelids droop, your breath fogs the air, and you curl around the stone like it's the last ember of a dying fire. Around you, others do the same. Their silhouettes hunched, arms folded over their secret treasures. The tent creaks in the wind, frost rattles against the canvas. But inside, dozens of stones glow invisibly, forming a fragile barrier between the living and the frozen. As you drift toward sleep, a simple truth becomes clear. Survival in these camps wasn't about grand strategies or knightly valor. It was small acts like this, heating a stone, wrapping it in cloth, holding it close until morning. History records the great battles, but these faint, intimate victories, the warmth pressed to your chest, kept armies alive. You surrender to the heat while it lasts, knowing it will be gone by dawn, yet grateful for every fleeting moment. The stone cools, your body stiffens, but you hold onto the memory of its warmth. Even in the darkest night, the earth itself can lend strength. Morning arrives. The stone's heat is gone, and wind gnaws at the tent. A loose flap lets a sharp draft in, making the canvas groan like a ship at sea. You pull your cloak tighter and confront an old truth. Winter campaigning was never ideal. Commanders avoided it whenever possible. Campaign seasons generally ran from late spring to early autumn. Crops needed harvesting, supply lines required passable roads, and men were less likely to desert when conditions weren't unbearable. Kings and captains often disbanded forces before frost set in. Yet exceptions existed. Sieges could last months, even years, leaving retreat impossible and the cold another front in the war. You think of the siege of Antioch during the First Crusade, when soldiers shivered through 1097 to 1098, surviving on boiled leather and rats. Chroniclers describe men falling in the snow outside city walls, corpses stiff by morning. You picture yourself among them, breath frosting, bones aching, waiting for a dawn that offers no warmth. A curious, almost absurd practice comes to mind. Some commanders kept men marching in bitter weather to maintain blood flow. One account even describes entire units circling the camp before bed, stamping and swinging arms to ward off frost. You imagine 1,000 exhausted soldiers trudging in rings like a strange midnight dance, too tired to complain, too fearful to stop. Modern historians debate how common winter warfare truly was. Some claim it was rare, reserved for desperate circumstances. Others point to Scandinavia and the Baltic, where frozen rivers provided strategic highways during winter. Evidence varies by region, leaving scholars divided. Inside this sagging tent, one truth is undeniable: whether by choice or cruel fate, winter has always been the harshest battlefield. The tent creaks again. A flap slaps against its pole. Comrades mutter curses at the commander who brought them here, or vow to desert at first light. Yet no one moves. Frost pins them like chains. The smells are sharper tonight: smoke from dampened fires, thick wool sweat, and the sour tang of frozen breath. Pine from distant forests drifts in, a cruel reminder of nature's beauty while you suffer. You close your eyes, imagining shelter among those trees, knowing in reality they stand bare, as exposed as you. You roll onto your back, staring at the canvas roof glittering with frost. Ice crystals trace the seams, delicate and cruel. Each gust makes the structure shudder, and you wonder how many tents collapse under snow's weight. Men might wake buried in drifts, or never wake at all. An older soldier near you mutters about campaigns where armies lost more men to frost than swords. He recalls bodies lined in rows, faces peaceful as if asleep. No wounds, no battle cries, only cold's quiet victory. The tent falls silent. His words resonate in your bones. Yet another perspective waits, unspoken. A younger soldier responds with a story of a summer siege, where disease and decay claimed more lives than winter ever could. He argues that while cold is harsh, heat and filth are even more merciless. The men murmur, half agreeing, half skeptical. The question hangs, timeless and unanswerable: which season is deadlier? Which enemy more relentless, winter's frost or summer's plague? No answer comes, only silence, broken by the restless shuffle of men seeking sleep. You draw a deep breath, the air sharp as needles, letting the argument linger. In truth, both sides are correct. War has no gentle season. As the year turns, suffering merely shifts form. Tonight, it is winter's turn. Hours crawl. You press your boots against another man's shins for warmth, ignoring his grumble. You pull your cloak over your face to block the draft, inhaling the sour, smoky fabric until your head spins. You try not to think of the officers who will rise tomorrow in pavilions lined with rugs, or villagers shivering in stripped, roofless homes. Instead, you focus on survival, stamping feet, rubbing hands, breathing slowly, praying morning arrives swiftly. Eventually, your eyelids droop. Sleep comes not as comfort but surrender, dragging you into half-dreams of endless marches across frozen fields. In your dreams, ice cracks beneath every step, boots stiff, breath trailing in long white ribbons. You wake briefly, heart racing, only to realize you remain in the tent, alive yet trapped in winter's grip. Resigned, you settle again, muttering a curse at the season itself. Winter was never meant for war. And yet here you are, one more soldier testing the patience of frost. You shift in the straw bed, the cold steady and unyielding, and your mind drifts to comparisons. Not all soldiers confronted the night the same way. What works here might fail elsewhere. You picture distant lands, Scandinavia in the north, Spain in the south, and realize survival methods varied as much as the people who used them. Chronicles attest that northern troops, hardened to brutal winters, relied on reindeer hides, seal skins, and layered wool. Viking descendants later wrapped themselves in furs so thick they resembled bears more than men. Tents were lined with hides, and temporary snow walls sometimes shielded camps from wind. Compared to your thin canvas, it seems a luxury born of necessity. By contrast, soldiers from warmer lands trusted wool cloaks and layered tunics. Unaccustomed to deep frost, Spanish and Italian troops often suffered in northern campaigns. Accounts from the Hundred Years' War describe southern mercenaries bewildered by snow, huddling in cloaks too thin to stop the bite. One chronicler notes men from Aragon cursing the sky itself when frost pinned them down. Clashing climates turned campaigns into cruel experiments. Then there are stranger methods. Baltic warriors reportedly rub themselves with animal fat before sleep, believing it sealed in warmth. You picture the tent filled with the stench of rancid grease, men glistening like wax candles, snoring while comrades gag. Absurd, yet desperation makes every trick worth trying. Such odd customs recur in records. Half survival, half superstition. Scholars debate their importance. Some claim climate-dictated habits, carried wherever soldiers marched, poorly suited to new lands. Others counter that armies quickly adopted effective methods from locals and enemies. Evidence is sparse. A chronicle here, a scrap of fur there, leaving only fragments of certainty. You lie on your back, imagining yourself a soldier in Scandinavia. Snow piles high outside, but the tent is warm with reindeer hides and felted wool. The air still bites, yet you endure. Then you imagine a Spaniard dragged north, teeth chattering, cloak sodden with sleet, cursing the day he left home. Which is worse? To live in cold and be hardened, or stumble into it unprepared? The scents shift with the vision. In the north, musk of hides, pine smoke, fish oil lamps. In the south, rain-soaked wool, olive wood smoke, faint tang of cheap wine. Both stink, but each tells a different story. Survival always has a smell. The men in your tent begin a quiet conversation about past marches. One recalls Castilian mercenaries shivering so badly they could barely hold crossbows. Another swears he saw Swedes stride barefoot across snow, skin raw but faces calm. The contrast stuns you, revealing human stubbornness. What breaks one barely touches another. You wrap your cloak tighter, wondering which you are, hardened northerner or shivering southerner. Likely you suspect the truth lies between. You endure because you must, not because you were born to it. The debate drifts into jokes. One man laughs that northerners sleep with seals, southerners with goats. Another claims the French are worst of all, complaining in every climate, neither hardy in cold nor comfortable in heat. Laughter spreads, warming the air more than any brazier. It is a lesson repeated nightly. Humor is insulation. The tent rustles as the wind rattles it. You press your boots deeper into the straw, imagining distant camps, their techniques, the sounds and smells that shape them. Survival is never universal. It is a patchwork of habits, tricks, and inherited wisdom. What keeps a man alive in Norway might fail in Lombardy. What comforts a Spaniard may be useless in Livonia. Cold respects no uniform, banner, or tongue. Yet across regions, one truth unites them: men endure. They adapt, borrow, improvise, huddling in cloaks, smearing grease, curling against beasts, praying to saints. Each land provides different tools, but the struggle is the same: to wake when dawn comes. You close your eyes again, letting the wind batter the canvas, feeling a fleeting connection to all of them: the fur-wrapped northerners, wool-swaddled southerners, grease-smeared soldiers. Across centuries and miles, they share the same shiver, groan, and stubborn breath fogging the frozen air. The night drags on, time meaningless. Midnight or dawn, both feel distant. You shift in the straw, hearing leather harnesses creak. For a moment, you think horses are being saddled. Then you realize the sound is closer, men rolling restlessly, boots squeaking, straps tugging against tunics. And you remember the truth every soldier knows. Warmth comes not only from what you wear at night, but from what you endured all day. A fact every commander understood. Marching kept soldiers alive. Movement circulated blood, eased stiffness, and countered the cold. Armies that kept moving during the day fared better at night, no matter how uncomfortable the tents. Chroniclers of winter campaigns often noted that soldiers dreaded long pauses. Stillness was dangerous. It was better to trudge through mud or snow than to sit idly while frost gnawed at fingers and toes. You remember the endless walking, mud sucking at your boots, your cloak heavy with sleet, your breath forming clouds in the air. At the time, every step felt like a curse. Now, lying still, you almost miss it. The march was punishing, but it kept your blood hot, your toes tingling, your muscles alive. In stillness, your body becomes a slowly dying ember. Then there was a peculiar habit some soldiers swore by. Before sleep, men would rise and run laps around the camp, stamping and clapping like drunken dancers until they were steaming with heat. You picture dozens of exhausted figures circling tents under moonlight, sweat freezing on their brows, before crawling back into the straw. Absurd perhaps, but desperate routines often worked. Historians still debate how deliberate these practices were. Some suggest commanders enforced movement as discipline. Others claim soldiers invented them, small groups fighting the cold in the only way they knew. Evidence is scattered, letters, anecdotes, chroniclers' notes, but the image remains, an army warming itself not with fire, but through frantic motion. You stretch beneath your cloak, feeling the dull ache from yesterday's march. Every joint protests, every tendon complains. Yet part of you is grateful. The soreness is proof you're still alive, still moving. Around you, men murmur about tomorrow's route, how many miles, which rivers to cross, which villages to strip for food and straw. No one welcomes the march, but everyone knows it is necessary. To lie still too long is to die. The camp smells reinforce the memory: damp leather, horse sweat, churned earth. The scents cling to your cloak, recalling the day's survival, stamping boots in rhythm, shields clanging together in crude songs, arms swinging to keep blood moving. The odors are sour, but strangely comforting, proof your body has not yet surrendered to frost. One man groans, recalling a march in Burgundy where they trudged until midnight, not for strategy, but to avoid freezing. Another laughs darkly, claiming commanders lied, disguising survival as military wisdom. Perhaps both are true. You reflect on the irony, you curse every march, yet long for it at night. War breeds contradictions. The same feet blistered by day are thanked at night for keeping blood alive. You curse mud, then pray for another march, if only to feel warmth again. Survival is inconsistent, shifting with the hour, the weather, the whims of chance. The wind groans through ropes and you curl tighter. You imagine yourself outside again, slogging through snow under a pale sky. The rhythm of steps numbs thought. Boots crunch, carts groan, horses snort. Miserable as it is, marching grants control. Each step is proof you are still fighting, still resisting. In the tent, you are passive. On the road, every pace is a small victory. Men around you fall quiet, some dozing, others muttering half-dreams of tomorrow's route. You lie awake, aware of your stillness, longing for motion. You flex your toes inside your boots, stamping lightly against the straw, pretending to walk. Pitiful, yes, but enough to reassure you, you are not frozen yet. Historians debate how much marching was tactical versus survival, but for you, the answer is clear. The road itself is a shield. Each mile a weapon against death. You close your eyes, humming the faint rhythm of marching songs, letting your body imagine movement. Sleep approaches, wrapping you like a cloak, and you surrender with the faintest smile. You awaken again, not to frost or footsteps, but to low voices weaving a rhythm that pulls you from half-dreams into the present. At first, you think it is prayer, but then recognize a rough ballad, carried from village to village, patched with new verses at each campfire. Music was as much a survival tool as cloaks or fires. Chroniclers sometimes describe soldiers gathering around dying embers, singing not for glory, but for warmth of spirit. In frozen nights, a tune could be a second blanket, spun from memory and humor. It reminded men they were alive, still human, not merely stiff bodies in the frost. Voices croon unevenly, cracked from cold. Some are too weary, others too loud from drink. Lyrics shift between homesickness and mocking commanders. You smile at a refrain, part curse, part joke, poking fun at noblemen in velvet pavilions. Laughter interrupts the rhythm, yet it matters not. It is part of the song. Curiously, some soldiers kept rattles, simple instruments carved from gourds or bones, to mark the rhythm. You picture a man shaking one now, straw rustling beneath his tapping foot, filling the tent with something close to joy. Crude, yes, but when faced with silence or laughter, laughter wins. Scholars debate how much of this music was ritual, how much improvisation. Was it organized, led by a designated singer? Or spontaneous, drunken mumbling turning into chorus by accident? Some argue marching songs naturally extended into camp life. Others insist cold nights were too harsh for wasted breath. Evidence is fragmentary, verses in manuscripts, echoes of long-lost melodies. Here, in this moment, no parchment is needed. You hear it, feel it, almost see it. The song binds men closer than canvas walls. The cold retreats, not gone, but quieter, drowned by voices. The air still smells of wool, smoke, sweat, yet seems less oppressive. The rhythm of song quickens your heart, warms you in ways fire cannot. You hum quietly, unaware of the words, catching the tune. A nearby man slaps your shoulder, grinning, urging participation. Your voice joins the chorus, awkward but sincere. Others cheer, though it's little more than a wheeze from dry lungs. You laugh, realizing a truth: the cold can steal comfort and strength, but not the ability to mock it in song. Another soldier begins a bawdy verse about fleas in his straw, and the tent erupts. For a moment, laughter drowns the wind outside. Men clutch their sides, tears freezing on cheeks as they howl. The song dissolves into laughter, only to rebuild itself with another verse, slower, softer, homesick. This one speaks of wives, bread, and fields left waiting. The mood shifts like smoke, one moment rowdy, the next tender. The flicker of the brazier illuminates faces, showing hardened men softened, almost childlike, swaying together, voices trembling with memories of home. You close your eyes and imagine your own hearth, your family's voices, the familiar creak of your bed. It aches, but it warms too. Nostalgia becomes another form of insulation. The debate over this will continue long after you're gone. Did soldiers really sing this much, or did chroniclers exaggerate for color? Archaeologists can dig up pots and weapons, but no one can unearth a melody. Still, as you lie there letting the chorus wash over you, it doesn't matter. Even if the record is silent, the truth is in the breath. Men sing when they are cold because silence is worse. The ballad fades into murmurs, then snores. The warmth lingers like embers in the dark. You curl into your cloak, straw pricking your back, boots stiff, yet you feel steadier. The night hasn't warmed, but your heart has. You drift back into shallow sleep, the last notes humming, carrying you toward dreams where the cold cannot follow. The song is gone, replaced by the steady crackle of men shifting in straw. You roll to one side, nose against the damp canvas, catching a faint herbal scent. At first, you think it's smoke drifting from outside, but then you notice stalks and leaves tucked under bedding. One nearby soldier crushes a handful of sage beneath his mat, the scent sharp, earthy, cutting through the musk of wool and sweat. You realize some men stuffed their bedding with herbs, believing it warded off illness and vermin. Chroniclers occasionally mention sage, juniper, or even garlic beneath straw, a genuine practice from the period. Part medical theory, part superstition, these herbs were thought to purify air, repel fleas, and balance the body's humors. Whether effective or not, they offered a sense of protection when survival was never guaranteed. You pick up a stalk, sniffing the sharp scent, refreshing compared to wet wool. A soldier mutters that juniper smoke drives sickness away. Another swears garlic under straw keeps lungs strong. You can't help smiling at the mixture of conviction and desperation. Some armies even burned bundles of herbs inside tents, filling the air until men coughed through tears. They believed disease lingered in foul air, and clean smoke would drive out illness. You picture it, half a dozen men hacking, eyes streaming, tent thick with sage fumes, and laugh quietly. Maybe it worked, maybe it just made everyone too dizzy to notice the cold. Modern scholars debate how common these practices really were. Some suggest they were widespread, adapted from village remedies. Others argue they were luxuries, possible only near fertile land. Archaeological finds, charred juniper twigs, preserved garlic bulbs, offer hints, but their exact purpose remains unclear. Were they medicine or just flavor for rations? The tent fills with mixed scents: sharp, bitter sage, heavy garlic, sweet decaying straw. Strange as it is, it masks the smell of damp boots and unwashed bodies. You feel comforted as though the herbs truly push back the cold. Your chest feels lighter, your breath steadier. Perhaps ritual matters more to the mind than proof does to the body. Across the tent, a soldier tells of a German camp where men stuffed lavender into bedding to soothe dreams and repel lice. Another scoffs, "Lavender is for ladies, not soldiers." Laughter spreads. Soon half the tent debates which herb is strongest against the cold. Not a scholarly discussion, but a chorus of tired men clinging to hope. You run your fingers through the straw, feeling brittle stalks and garlic skins. It's odd, almost comic, yet reassuring. Even in war's mud, men reach for plants, the same herbs their mothers once tucked in cupboards, now fighting frost and fear beneath their heads. The scents grow stronger. Herbs mingle with smoke, creating a haze that blurs the senses. You feel drowsy, lulled not only by exhaustion but by a faint sense of protection. Whether the herbs heal or not, they soothe the mind, and sometimes that's enough to keep the body alive. You close your eyes, inhaling the earthy tang. The cold still bites at your feet, your cloak still itches, but your mind drifts easier. Perhaps you'll wake with lice crawling, or perhaps the garlic drives them off. Perhaps the sage smoke eases your lungs, or makes you cough. You don't know and you don't care. You feel safer, warmer, less alone. Yet the herbal scent only partially masks another truth of tent life. The itching returns, relentless. Not straw, not wool, living companions thriving where warmth and bodies press together. Lice, fleas, vermin that hate frost as much as soldiers love survival. This was a constant of medieval camps. Chronicles describe men scratching raw, garments crawling with lice, straw alive with fleas. Nobles and peasants alike suffered, though some hid it with perfumes or frequent linen changes. You feel it now, the tickle across your scalp, phantom crawling down your back. No cloak or fur can stop it. A soldier mutters curses, tugging at his tunic. Another digs at his beard, scattering skin flakes onto straw. A third smacks his thigh in triumph over an invisible parasite. The tent becomes a hive of scratching and swearing, each man waging private war against enemies too small to see. Curiously, some records note that soldiers believed vermin kept them warm. The idea was that lice and fleas, feeding on blood, somehow generated heat through their constant movement. One chronicler mocked this, describing it as a fire that burns only in torment. Yet, desperate men convinced themselves of almost anything. The thought is grotesque, almost laughable, the ultimate irony that suffering might be reframed as warmth. Scholars debate whether vermin infestations were worse in winter or summer. Some suggest layers of cloaks, furs, and unwashed bedding in cold months created ideal breeding grounds. Others argue that heat and filth in summer camps were equally, if not more, conducive. The debate has no definitive answer. Lice leave little trace beyond anecdote. Still, arguments persist in journals and books, while here in the tent, proof scratches at your skin relentlessly. The tent smells heavier now, the musky tang of sweat-soaked wool that never dries, the sour bite of damp straw, and a faint metallic whiff of scratched blood. You wrinkle your nose, knowing escape is impossible. Cleanliness is a luxury of bathhouses and monasteries, not muddy fields and siege lines. Someone mutters about a captain in Flanders who shaved his entire body to rid himself of lice. His men laughed, until they noticed he slept more peacefully than anyone else. Another story claims boiling clothes in vinegar drove the pests away, though sourcing enough vinegar in a campaign seems unlikely. The tent erupts into debate, part advice, part mockery, as though chatter alone could kill the fleas. You shift, tugging your cloak tighter, trying to ignore the itch, but the discomfort gnaws at your sanity more cruelly than frost. Cold numbs, but vermin keep you awake. You sigh, realizing war shows no mercy. One moment, arrows and steel threaten your life. The next, creatures smaller than a fingernail undermine it just as surely. Scratching at your scalp, flakes falling onto your cloak, you wonder how many have fallen sick, not from swords, but from fevers carried by these parasites. Typhus, trench fever, and nameless chills. You shiver, not from cold. Lice thrive where men huddle for warmth, turning the very act of survival into a source of infestation. It is a cruel trade. You live another night, itchy, sore, restless. Survival is rarely clean or noble. You close your eyes, scratching less, accepting their presence. Perhaps the soldier was right in a grim sense. The pests are proof that you are alive enough to feed them. The scratching fades with exhaustion, only to flare when you shift. By now, you have grown almost numb to it, as a soldier becomes numb to the weight of his sword. Your gaze catches a flicker at the far end of the tent. A soldier has spread something bright across his bedding. A reminder that armies stole not only food and straw, but fine cloth, tapestries from manor walls, embroidered church hangings, bolts of velvet from merchants, all pressed into service as insulation. What once symbolized wealth or sanctity now fights frost. Chroniclers noted these thefts, half in disgust, half in admiration for ingenuity. You crawl closer, running your fingers over the fabric. Even in dim light, the crimson threads glimmer faintly. Now dirt-smeared and frayed, it once held magnificence. The man lying on it grins, boasting that it keeps frost off better than straw. You want to argue, but your hand lingers. Luxury amid misery. Soldiers even wrap themselves in stolen altar cloths, gold-threaded fabric draped over saints, less for reverence than warmth. One chronicler scolded troops for wiping boots on cathedral banners. For soldiers, warmth outweighed sacrilege. Modern researchers debate the prevalence of this practice. Some claim stories of looted silks were exaggerations condemning armies for impiety. Others point to inventories and campaign records listing tapestries and cloth as spoils. Excavations sometimes reveal dyed thread, though whether from fine hangings or garments is unclear. The debate continues, caught between moral outrage and practical need. The tent hums with murmurs as men boast of stolen treasures. One claims to sleep on a tapestry depicting angels, half burned by sparks from abrasia. Another says his cloak lining came from a noblewoman's gown, though skepticism greets the claim. Jealousy and laughter fill the air. For a moment, the cold is almost forgotten amid disputes over warmth. Smoke from the brazier mixes with wool, sweat, damp cloth, even a faint hint of beeswax from a church banner once beside candles. Half sacred, half profane, it is a reminder that war respects no boundaries. You return to your straw, picturing the tapestry as it once hung, gleaming under torchlight, admired by nobles. Now it lies crushed under soldiers, smothered in mud and breath. Perhaps this is the fate of all finery in war, repurposed, stripped of beauty, reduced to survival. Nearby, a soldier warns that the saints will curse thieves of their cloth. Another scoffs, warmth is blessing enough. Debate erupts again, half theological, half practical. You smile faintly, men still find energy to argue even amid frost. Perhaps this is another form of warmth. The silk glows faintly in the brazier's light, like a dying ember. You curl tighter in your cloak, straw scratching your back, imagining the softness. But silk alone cannot sustain life. It is still cloth, vulnerable to damp and frost. What matters is surviving to dawn. Turning from its gleam, you whisper a prayer that your coarse wool will suffice. Luxury may ease the night, but endurance carries you forward. The silk fades as you retreat into your own cocoon of damp wool. For a moment, you close your eyes, trying to drift back into sleep. But a soft murmur breaks the quiet. It's not the raucous chorus of song, nor the steady cadence of prayer. This is gentler, more intimate. You realize the voices don't belong only to soldiers. Women move between the tents, whispering, tending, carrying a different kind of warmth. It's a part of army life rarely celebrated in chronicles, yet well known. Camp followers, wives, lovers, laresses, cooks, or women seeking safety with the army, traveled with medieval forces. They carried burdens, patched torn tents, mended cloaks, and sometimes kept fires alive through the night. Without them, many armies would have frozen, starved, and collapsed much sooner. You open your eyes and see a woman adjusting a tent flap, tucking straw into gaps to block drafts. Another sets a small pot near the brazier, thin steam carrying the faint smell of broth. Inside, men stir, some murmuring thanks, others too exhausted to do more than grunt. The air feels warmer, not from the pot itself, but because someone cares enough to tend it. Then comes one of those intimate details whispered through history. Some women slept beside soldiers, not just for comfort, but to share body heat. Practicality and emotion intertwined. A warm body beside you could mean the difference between stiff limbs or death. Chroniclers often sneered at this, labeling it immoral, but the men curling closer under their cloaks tell the truth. In frost, virtue is a luxury, warmth is survival. Historians debate the numbers. Some suggest only small groups of women traveled at the edges of camps, while others point to evidence of entire communities, wives, children, even elderly kin, moving with armies across Europe, forming a shadow society behind the lines. Excavations reveal domestic items, spindles, children's toys, showing the army's footprint extended beyond swords and shields. Likely, the balance shifted with each campaign. You lie back, listening to faint sounds, a spoon scraping a pot, a lullaby hummed to a child tucked in a corner. The air carries the mixed aroma of herbs and broth, softening the rankness of the tents. War is misery, yet this presence softens its edges. A soldier jokes, the women are braver than the men, facing the cold without armor or weapons. Laughter follows, respectful, tinged with truth. You imagine the courage required to march with an army, facing frost, hunger, and danger without pay or protection. Admiration warms you more than the brazier. Another man tells of a lares who saved her husband from a frozen ditch after a march. He had collapsed, half dead, but her shouting roused others to drag him back to camp. Without her, he would have been another frostbound body. You picture her determined face, refusing to let winter win. These stories rarely reach chronicles but live on in tents, passed down like charms against despair. Scholars argue whether women were reluctantly tolerated or embraced as vital. Some claim commanders despised them, fearing distraction. Others note rations were sometimes officially allocated, proof of recognition. In this moment, parchment evidence isn't necessary. You hear them stirring pots, patching cloaks, humming softly. Their labor is as integral to survival as any cloak. The cold still bites, but it feels less cruel when a flap is adjusted to block the wind. You curl tighter into your cloak, letting the murmurs wash over you. For a moment, it almost feels like home. Sleep comes easier with that comfort. You breathe in, letting the scent of broth and herbs mingle with the musk of the tent. Outside, frost sharpens its teeth, but inside, warmth is shared, not just through fire or bodies, but through hands that mend, voices that soothe, and the persistent presence of women who refuse to be left behind. Slowly, their murmurs fade as exhaustion overtakes the tent. You roll onto your back, staring at faint frost crystals spidering across the canvas. Embers glow dimly, and the uneven snoring of companions seems almost rhythmic. One voice rises above the rest, a knight's complaint from the larger pavilion. His authority carries even in grumble, drawing bitter chuckles. Sources attest that rank affected perception of the cold. Knights and noble officers had larger tents, rugs, servants, and richer bedding, yet they still complained. Peasants and foot soldiers, packed like salted fish, endured silently. Chroniclers recorded the grievances of lords, while common men's murmurs rarely reached parchment. Here in the dark, you hear both. The knight curses stiff joints and ruined armor straps. A soldier beside you snorts, saying he'd trade frostbitten toes for damaged straps. Another mocks, "Hark! The lords freeze differently than us." Laughter spreads low and muffled, but it carries warmth. Humor is rebellion. In the cold, rebellion keeps you alive. Even the privileged sometimes envied their men. Chronicles hint nobles, cocooned in vast pavilions, froze more than the huddled soldiers. Shared misery brings warmth. A feather bed may seem luxurious, but when fires die and canvas shakes, loneliness can be colder than straw. Scholars debate the gulf between noble and peasant comfort. Some say disparities were extreme, others caution exaggeration by storytellers. Likely, conditions varied with time and place. A duke in Burgundy slept on cushions, while a minor knight in Scotland froze as much as his men. Evidence is scattered, debates linger. Smells tell a story too. The noble pavilion carries resin and spiced wine. Your tent smells of smoke, sweat, and garlic-stuffed straw. You wrinkle your nose but smile faintly. Sense narrates class as much as banners or coats of arms. One companion whispers of a baron who once brought a portable brazier carved in silver, glowing like a king's hearth. Another soldier shares a tale of a knight who demanded heated stones wrapped in velvet, only for them to burn holes in the cloth. Laughter ripples through the tent, sharp and satisfied. The more absurd the noble complaints, the warmer the common men seem to feel in mocking them. You shift under your cloak, pressing closer to the soldier beside you, wondering how much truth lies in these stories. Perhaps exaggeration fuels resentment. Perhaps the truth is simpler. Every man, noble or peasant, groans under the frost in his own way. Yet the complaints of knights sting more because they are heard more. To lie freezing in straw while hearing your lord lament damp boots is misery piled upon insult. The tent grows quiet again, though occasional muttered jokes flare like sparks from a dying fire. You close your eyes, tasting the lingering bitterness of class in the air. Survival may bind soldiers together, but comfort divides them, and envy sharpens even as frost numbs. And yet, there is a humbling truth you cannot ignore. When dawn comes, knight and peasant alike will rise stiff, scrape ice from their cloaks, and march side by side. Rank may separate comforts, but it does not spare anyone from the frost. The cold is mercilessly democratic. With that thought, you tug your cloak tighter and let sleep claim you again. Your last awareness is the contrast between muffled noble complaints and the rough silence of men who simply endure. You wake to a strange noise, not coughing, not muttering, not the wind whistling through the tent seams. It is chewing, soft, steady, almost desperate. Turning your head, you see a soldier crouched low, gnawing at something by the dim glow of embers. At first, you think it is bread, but then notice the glint of metal as he scrapes dried meat from his dagger. The faint smell of grease drifts across the straw, and your stomach tightens with envy. Food always food. History records it plainly. The cold could be endured if bellies were full, but hunger made frost unbearable. Armies running short on rations saw morale collapse, desertion rise, and disease spread faster than any arrow. Survival depended not only on fire and furs, but on the heat of food in men's bellies. You roll onto your side, remembering your last meal, thin gruel, half frozen before it reached your bowl. It warmed your throat for a moment before leaving you hungrier than before. The man chewing now has something richer, hard sausage, perhaps, or a lump of rendered fat. You can almost taste the salt and faint tang of smoke. And then comes one of those peculiar historical details whispered among soldiers. They sometimes slipped hot stones into pots, both to heat gruel and stretch it. Stones boiled with scraps of meat released minerals and thickened the liquid. Whether it truly nourished them is doubtful, but the illusion of a fuller meal made it easier to close one's eyes against the cold. You smile grimly at the image, dozens of men hunched over bowls, half soup, half river pebbles. Historians debate how much nutrition soldiers actually had during winter marches or sieges. Some insist supplies were carefully managed, citing records of grain and salted pork distributed in quotas. Others argue that corruption, theft, and logistical chaos left men starving more often than not. Archaeology supports both sides: gnawed animal bones in some camps, discarded heaps of grain in others. The truth, as always, seems uneven. In your tent, it doesn't matter. The proof is in your belly, growling loudly enough to make nearby men chuckle. One tosses you a crust of bread so hard it could be mistaken for stone. You gnaw at it anyway, grateful for the faint crunch and salty aftertaste. Hunger makes even misery taste good. The smells in the tent shift as men pull out scraps, dried peas, pork fat strips, chunks of onions smuggled from a village. The mingled scents fill the air, sour but comforting, masking the stink of wool and damp. For a moment, the tent feels less like a tomb and more like a kitchen. One soldier tells of a campaign in the Baltic where men roasted rats over a brazier, claiming the meat kept them warmer than any cloak. Another says he once ate boiled horsehides softened into a leather-like soup. The tent erupts in groans and laughter. Beneath the jokes lies truth. Hunger drove men to anything. You lick crumbs from your fingers and realize how deeply food shapes survival. A full belly brings better sleep, even on damp straw. Hunger, worse than frost, rattles men awake in endless shivers. A soldier who eats, even poorly, has a chance at dreams. A starving one stares at the canvas ceiling all night, listening to his bones creak. The debate among scholars echoes faintly in your mind. Was food enough to fight the cold, or just a temporary reprieve? Some note the high-calorie needs of winter marching, arguing rations could never keep pace. Others point out that preserved meat, cheese, and grain, when supplies held, gave armies surprising resilience. No single conclusion satisfies, but as you scrape the last crumb from your cloak, one thing is certain: tonight, your body is grateful for even this hard crust. The tent falls quieter as men finish chewing, bellies filled, however barely. Sighs replace groans. You close your eyes, feeling faint warmth spread from stomach to limbs. It is little but enough to coax drowsiness. You think of home, stews bubbling over hearths, bread fresh from the oven, meat cooked until juices ran. Then you open your eyes to the dim, smoky tent air, reminded that war offers no feast, only survival. You curl into your cloak, straw rustling, boots stiff against your shins, letting the meager comfort of food carry you toward uneasy sleep. Your belly holds just enough to take the edge off, but rest comes slowly. The tent feels damp, every draft cuts sharper than the last. You curl tighter, tucking knees under your chin, but it is never enough. The body resists warmth. No position feels right. You shift onto your side, then back, then stomach, each angle worse than the last. This is rarely glorified in chronicles, but admitted between the lines. Soldiers spent much of the night tossing, adjusting, never finding true rest. The cold turns the body into its own enemy. Muscles cramp, joints stiffen, and sleep comes in broken fragments rather than long stretches. Some letters from the period even note that battlefield exhaustion stemmed as much from poor nights as daytime marching. You glance around the tent, others fare no better. One man snores fitfully, jerking awake as if startled. Another sits upright, cloak wrapped tightly, muttering that lying down makes him colder. A third presses against the tent wall, his breath frosting the canvas in tiny patterns. Each man fights a losing battle against discomfort. And then you remember one of those odd habits soldiers sometimes resorted to. Soldiers often slept in curled positions borrowed from animals. Some huddled like dogs, knees drawn under their chests, arms wrapped tightly around themselves. Others lay face down, cloaks pulled entirely over their heads, turning into lumps of cloth. Chroniclers sometimes mocked them for sleeping like beasts, but imitation often meant survival. If a dog knew how to conserve warmth, why shouldn't a man? Scholars remain divided on how conscious these positions were. Some argue they were instinctive, bodies naturally curling against frost. Others suggest soldiers deliberately adopted them, even teaching one another which postures trapped the most heat. The lack of detailed descriptions makes certainty elusive, but the logic is clear. Every limb tucked in meant less heat lost. You roll onto your side, curling tighter, chin against your chest. The posture feels awkward, but slowly, faintly, warmth gathers around your torso. Your legs ache, your toes are frozen, but the shivering eases. You breathe shallowly, wary of releasing the little heat you've saved. The tent groans under the wind, straw crunches with each shift, and the scent of damp earth mixes with wool and smoke, a heavy, oppressive smell, yet oddly grounding. You imagine roots deep in the soil, surviving storms, and draw comfort, hoping you too might endure the night. A soldier nearby whispers, "Keep your arms tight. Don't stretch them, cold steals faster from open limbs." Another, half asleep, replies, "I'll trade your advice for your cloak." Their muffled laughter is tired but real. Even small jokes ease the endless shifting. You close your eyes, letting the rhythm of breathing guide you. Inhale, exhale, cloak pressed to face, boots locked against straw. Your body resists, but your mind urges stillness. Sleep comes slowly, like a drip filling a vessel, until it weighs down your eyelids. But the night offers no mercy. A draft brushes your neck like a knife. You jerk awake, curse, and pull the cloak tighter. The shivers return instantly, erasing minutes of effort. This pattern repeats, half an hour of dozing, half an hour of shivering until dawn. Historians may write of battles, banners, and speeches, but in the tent, the reality is simpler. War is fought not just with swords, but with every twisted position, every scrap of warmth, every cautious breath. The struggle is against enemies, and your own restless bones. You lie still, curled like a hound, listening to the chorus of restless sleepers. Snoring, coughing, muttered curses. It forms a crude lullaby. You drift, not into deep rest, but into survival. Suddenly you wake again, unsure why. The camp is silent except for shifting bodies and groaning canvas. Then you notice it. The air feels heavier, warmer, filled with the presence of so many pressed close. You inhale the damp, sour scent of sweat and smoke and recognize warmth. Soldiers often use this tactic, huddling together as human heaters. A single cloak or fur could not match the heat of multiple bodies pressed side by side. Chroniclers rarely lingered on it, but scattered notes describe companies lying like swine or sharing skins to survive the night. You shift closer to the man beside you. Knees touch, shoulders brush. It feels awkward at first. You are warriors, not kin, but warmth spreads quickly. Another man joins, and soon the tent becomes a tangle of bodies, cloaks, and steady breathing. Comfort is secondary, survival comes first. Old stories joke that the worst part was morning, when cloaks stiffened with frozen sweat and bodies steamed together. Peeling apart layers of men and cloth was unpleasant, yet life on the battlefield rarely tasted sweet. Scholars debate how widespread this practice was. Some argue it was routine, basic physics demanded it. Others point to modesty or masculinity, which might have caused some armies to resist. Archaeological evidence of communal shelters and large bedding pits strongly suggests many soldiers shared heat this way. Logic, more than written records, supports it. You rest your head against the man beside you, greasy hair, foul breath, but undeniable warmth. You close your eyes, imagining your village, curled beside family on a winter night. The illusion is fragile, yet soothing. In darkness, cold matters less than the rhythm of another chest rising and falling beside your own. The smell of crowded bodies is overwhelming, damp wool, greasy leather, smoke clinging to folds. Pungent and sour, yet in its own way, it is life. Blood flows, hearts beat, warmth radiates. A soldier jokes about pigs in a pen, and soft chuckles ripple through the tent. Complaints, sighs, and laughter mingle, weaving camaraderie into the night. The warmth grows almost stifling. You loosen your cloak, a luxury impossible earlier. The paradox is striking. The closeness that makes you itch, gag, or grumble is what keeps you alive. Scholars debate whether huddling was purely practical or also built bonds. Shared hardship may forge comradeship, yet resentment and conflict also thrived in tight quarters. The truth lies somewhere in between. You feel elbows and knees press, a breath against your neck. Comfort and irritation coexist. The straw crunches under your weight, but warmth is steady now. Cold still nips at extremities, yet your core is wrapped in shared heat. For the first time in nights, shivering subsides. You sigh, sinking deeper into this crude embrace of survival. As you drift, reflection comes. Armies march under banners, fight for kings, pray to saints, but survival is simpler. It is bodies pressed together, hearts beating against frost, men becoming blankets for one another. It is not glorious, noble, or clean, but it works, and in this world, that is all that matters. You stir again, though not from cold, hunger, or itching this time, but from a sound that makes your body tense, the sudden blast of a horn outside. It is not the morning call. The sky remains dark, the tent frozen in night. Men around you jolt upright, fumbling for cloaks and blades. For a moment, fear grips you, raiders, enemy scouts slipping into camp. Then a familiar bark cuts through the tension, an officer's voice. Not alarm, just routine. A night watch announcing a guard change. It is a reminder of another truth. Soldiers did not always sleep through the night. Some stayed awake, pacing the perimeter, stamping their feet to keep blood flowing, keeping watch for ambush. Inside the tents, others half slept, alert for horns or shouts, knowing the night was never truly safe. Cold was already an enemy, but the threat of attack made rest fragile. You slump back into the straw, heart still hammering. Around you, men grumble, cursing the officer's loud call. One mutters, "Better noise than knives at our throats." He's right. You sigh, attempting to settle again, though sleep feels distant. And then there were the odd, almost comical routines, soldiers taking turns lying awake inside the tent, keeping the brazier alive or nudging comrades if their breathing faltered. A crude night watch within the shelter itself. Imagine trying to sleep while your comrade stares at you in the dark, ready to prod you back to life if you stopped snoring. Unsettling, yes, but effective when frost killed silently. Scholars still debate how much sleep soldiers really got. Some argue men collapsed from exhaustion, sleeping through anything. Others insist accounts of vigilance, men waking to stoke fires or adjust cloaks, are more accurate. Archaeology cannot settle it. Sleep leaves no trace, only scraps of writing, rarely detailed. Yet here, startled awake by horns, you know rest was rarely whole. Smoke drifts into the tent again, harsher now as guards stoke their fires against the dark, mixing with wool, sweat, and dust until your throat stings. A cough earns curses from the men beside you. Sleep, broken by noise, discomfort, and irritation. This is the rhythm of camp nights. A soldier recalls an ambush years ago, when men were caught half asleep, armor scattered, tents burning. Another counters that freezing to death silently would be worse. The debate flares briefly, extinguished by exhaustion. Soon, the tent mutters and dozes again, ears alert for the next horn. You pull your cloak tighter, dagger at your side, feeling how fear shapes the night. Frost bites, but it is the thought of sudden attack that keeps your mind restless. Even warmth cannot fully protect you when survival depends on vigilance. Historians debating logistics, rations, or tents often overlook this. The mental war fought in darkness. Men slept, yes, but always with watchfulness pressing down. No rest was unbroken, no dream undisturbed. You half expect to rise at a shout, weapon in hand before shaking off sleep. Rolling onto your side, boots pressing into straw, you listen as the horn sounds again in the distance. A guard shift, nothing more. The camp breathes unevenly. 1,000 men snore, cough, mutter in fractured unison. You close your eyes, forcing calm, telling yourself the night will pass without blades. You surrender again to the half-sleep unique to soldiers. Shallow, fractured, but enough. Enough to survive, if not dream, enough to endure until dawn slices across the horizon. The horn fades into memory, and for a while, you lose yourself again in the rhythm of fractured sleep. When you next stir, it isn't horns or drafts that wake you. It is a glow, faint, gray, pressing against canvas. You sit slowly, joints stiff, straw clinging to your cloak. Around you, men groan awake. Some rub frost from beards, others stamp boots to force feeling into toes. Inside, the air is sharp with smoke and sour breath. Outside, sharper still. You push aside the flap. The world greets you in steel, fields coated white, tents sagging under frost, ropes stiff as rods, horses steaming faintly in the pale light. The blunt truth hits. Surviving the night is only half the battle. Morning brings its own ordeal. Men rise groggy, aching, half-frozen, expected to march, fight, or dig as if the night had not gnawed their strength. Chroniclers often note armies staggering into formation, eyes still rimed in frost. You feel it now. Victory begins not with courage, but with the stubborn act of standing up. You stamp boots into snow. The shock jolts legs, painful but necessary. Around you, the ritual repeats, cursing, stamping, shaking cloaks, brushing frost from canvas. These are the morning hymns of a winter camp, sung with groans. Some men deliberately rub snow on their faces, claiming it wakes the blood better than fire. You imagine the sting, the burn, the cold against already raw skin. Pain as alarm clock, frost as reviving agent. Specialists still debate soldiers' functionality after nights like these. Fatigue, some say, crippled armies. Others insist necessity drove men forward, soldiers hardened quickly, or died early. Diaries and chronicles show both, units collapsing in exhaustion, others trudging onward. The truth, each man balanced on the line between breaking and enduring. Morning smells no kinder than night, smoke from fires mixing with manure, damp wool, and sour wine. But there is promise, too, porridge bubbling in iron pots, water hissing on coals. Thin fare, but hot, golden. The men stir more eagerly at that than any horn. Stepping outside, the camp is revealed. Lines of frost-rimed tents, men crouched over fires, women ladling broth, horses stamping. Pitiful yet defiant under the vast winter sky. Small, fragile, absurd, yet every figure breathes, moves, refuses to fall. That is true victory. A comrade claps your shoulder, hand rough, smile weary but real. Another night done, he says simply. The words carry more weight than any sermon. Another night done. Another night survived. You look back at your tent, sagging, reeking, frost-lined. You recall the long hours inside, straw that itched, boots that bruised, cloaks that scratched, vermin that bit, breath that froze. You remember the glow of braziers, stones cooling, songs rising, prayers murmured, laughter shared, envy simmering, warmth stolen from beasts and comrades alike. You remember the countless times you thought you couldn't make it until dawn, and yet you did. This, you realize, was as much a part of medieval warfare as swords and sieges, a relentless battle against the night itself. Chroniclers may have praised heroism on the battlefield, but the true test of endurance happened here, in the dark, in the cold, with only canvas, straw, and sheer determination. As the pale sun climbs, washing frost in silver light, you finally exhale. Not because the day will be easy, it won't, but because you survived the night. Now let the camp fade from your mind. Picture the frost-lined canvas dissolving, the groans of waking soldiers softening into whispers carried by the wind. You've walked through that night with them, felt the sting of straw, the bite of frost, the scratch of vermin, and the fleeting warmth of cloaks and braziers. Survival, you've seen, rarely appears noble. It relies on humor, superstition, companionship, and an unyielding will to see the morning. Allow that image to blur gently, like smoke rising from a fire and fading into gray sky. Picture the soldiers moving into a march, their forms receding into the distance, while your tent collapses into silence. The night you endured becomes a distant, harmless memory. Breathe slowly, deeply. Imagine your own space now, quieter, safer, warmer than any medieval camp. The harsh air softens into the calm of your room. The sting of frost dissolves into the comfort of your blanket. The restless mutters of men transform into the steady rhythm of your own breath. You don't need to stamp your feet or huddle for warmth. You don't need to fight for scraps or curse the wind. All of that belongs to another time, another place, long gone. You can rest now, knowing you have walked through their world and left it behind. Close your eyes, let your body sink into the mattress, and watch the last fragments of the scene dissolve. Soldiers fade, frost melts, campfire smoke vanishes. All that remains is quiet. Quiet and rest. Quiet and sleep.